Chapter 377. Eric parked the car and walked to the set of Flashpoint that had been cordoned off. This was a residential area called Fox Hill in the southwest of Culver City. Of course, this Fox Hill had nothing to do with the Fox Film Company. If one had to nitpick, one could only blame it on the Westerners' poor naming skills. The staff on the set recognized Eric at a glance. They greeted him warmly and pulled open the cordon to let Eric in. In front of him was a street that had been temporarily blocked off. Before he got close to the set, Eric could smell the pungent smell of burning gasoline. Bypassing a trailer used by the crew to load props, Eric saw that outside a gas station on the street, several cars were still smoking. Several staff members were busy with fire extinguishers. Glancing around the set, Eric quickly found Kathryn Bigelow. The woman's typical outfit was too easy to recognize. She was wearing a white baseball cap, a tight-fitting white long-sleeve t-shirt, a black short-sleeve t-shirt, and a pair of simple washed jeans. A satchel was tied to her waist. She looked very capable. At this time, Kathryn Bigelow was holding a script in her hand and talking to the two male leads, Keanu Reeves and Patrick Swayze. From time to time, she waved her hand a few times. According to the script, this scene should be about Utah discovering the identity of Borty and the others as bank robbers. He would wait outside a bank that Borty had stepped on, and it would eventually evolve into a chase scene. When an assistant director of the crew saw Eric, he ran over and asked, "Mr. Williams, do you need me to call Ms. Bigelow?" Eric shook his head. "No need. How's the shooting going?" "Not bad. We've already completed 7 scenes today. The next scene is the one where Utah chases Borty," the assistant director explained. Eric said with satisfaction, "Find me a place to rest. I'm just here to take a look. I won't disturb her work." "No problem. Please come this way." The assistant director led Eric to a specially opened rest area. It seemed to be prepared for the actors. A middle-aged man with silver hair was sitting on a chair drinking water. When he saw Eric, he stood up and said, "Hello, Mr. Williams." "Gary, just call me Eric. You must be tired from the scene just now, right?" Eric smiled and shook hands with him. The silver-haired middle-aged man's name was Gary Busey. He played the role of Angelo Pappas, Utah's boss. Eric had seen many of Gary Busey's movies in his previous life. Speaking of which, Gary Busey was the same as Virginia's brother, Michael Madsen. In the parallel world, the two of them were actors who had acted in dozens of Hollywood movies, but their presence was extremely weak. "It's all right. I've already finished my scenes in the morning. Keanu and Pat are the ones who will be very tired. They have a very long chase scene to shoot. They might not even finish it today," Gary Busey said with a smile. He took out a bottle of water from the box beside him and handed it to Eric. Eric took it and pulled a folding chair over to sit beside Gary Busey. They chatted casually. As Kathryn Bigelow's voice sounded on the set, another scene began. Eric then realized that the two men were sitting facing the director's monitor more than 10 meters away. Kathryn Bigelow still did not notice Eric. She returned behind the monitor and ordered the shooting to begin. The woman stood behind the monitor with her arms crossed, staring at the scene where Keanu, who was playing Utah, was fighting with the masked Patrick Swayze. Eric and Gary Busey stopped chatting at the same time and stared at the back of the woman more than 10 meters away. They enjoyed it very much. Some people often said that a white face can hide 100 ugliness. In fact, height could also hide 100 ugliness. Of course, Kathryn Bigelow was not ugly. In fact, she was very beautiful. Moreover, she was 182 meters tall. After a while, Gary Busey turned his head and noticed that Eric's eyes were focused on Kathryn Bigelow not far away. The middle-aged man grinned, revealing a mouthful of front teeth, and said with a smile, "Very hot, isn't she?" Eric and Gary Busey looked at each other. The two men revealed a slightly wretched smile at the same time. "Yes, very hot." Gary Busey seemed to have found a soulmate. He said bluntly, "That bastard Cameron really got lucky." This. Gary Busey turned again to Kathryn Bigelow, who was not far away. The scene of Utah and Borty fighting was not shown. The woman walked over and discussed with the two male leads. Eric, actually, Kate and I have known each other for more than 10 years. Wow, I really didn't know that. Eric looked at Gary Busey in surprise. Gary Busey said in a reminiscing tone, "That should be 1977. I can't remember the exact time. I was still acting in plays on Broadway at that time. I would only take on a few movies occasionally. I remember one day, a friend of mine introduced me to Kate. He said that she wanted to shoot a short film and was looking for a male lead. I still remember the first time I saw Kate in a coffee shop in Manhattan's Soho district. She was wearing a black turtleneck sweater and black jeans. Her brown hair was let down, and she looked very shy. She had the intellectual aura of an artistic young woman in Soho. She was not good at socializing. She still blushes when she sees strangers. When I first saw her, I was infatuated with her, just like many of the men around her. And then?" Eric asked with interest. "Later, I acted in her short film. I think it was called Fighter. It was about two men fighting. She and I became good friends. Over the years, we have all entered middle age, but her appearance and figure have hardly changed. This made many of her female friends crazy with jealousy." Eric asked, "Just good friends?" Gary Busey shrugged. "I got married early. Otherwise, I would have pursued her. But it would have been very difficult. She's a very vicious woman. She's very talented and has very strong self-control. She's a feminist at heart." For many years after that, she remained single. Our friends thought that she would stay single forever. Unexpectedly, she suddenly married Cameron 3 years ago. "What a heartbreaking result," Eric joked. Gary Busey laughed and nodded honestly. "Of course. How could I not be heartbroken when I saw my goddess marry another man?" The two of them laughed a few times before looking at Kathryn Bigelow on set again. The woman was negotiating with the lighting technician again. She even made gestures from time to time. The lighting technician seemed to have a different opinion as he argued with the woman with a flurry of gestures. Seeing this scene, Gary Busey said with emotion, "In Hollywood, it's really difficult for a woman to be a director. If it were me, I would have quit long ago. It's hard for her to persist for so long and not give up." Eric had no intention of stepping forward to help. He believed that with Kathryn Bigelow's competitive personality, she would not want him to intervene. Looking at the woman and the lighting technician arguing, Eric nodded and said, "That's true. As a director, in addition to personal professionalism, not only is there a need for strong control, there's also a high demand for physical strength. High-intensity work is unbearable for most women, so whether it's Hollywood or other film circles, female directors are not very productive." The two of them chatted casually. After more than an hour, it was close to noon. The crew temporarily stopped to rest and have lunch. Kathryn Bigelow finally received notice that Eric had come to the set. "Hi, Eric, why are you here?" Kathryn Bigelow asked as she walked over enthusiastically and hugged Eric. Eric then greeted the two male leads beside Kathryn Bigelow before replying, "I was passing by and just happened to come and take a look." Kathryn drew a big circle in the air with her finger in disbelief. "You're saying that you passed by here on your way to Burbank from Malibu?" Eric rolled his eyes and pointed to the west. "Who told you that I went to Burbank?" Firefly's team is doing a field inspection in the Playa Vista area, about 3 kilometers to the west. Firefly plans to build a studio base there, so I left the team and came here. Kathryn Bigelow nodded and looked to the west. She asked, "Don't you need to be there?" "Of course, professional matters are left to the professionals. I can't be of much help if I'm there. I just need to see the results they give in the end." Gary Busey interjected at this time. "Eric, Kathryn, lunch is ready. Let's talk while we eat." The crew had lunch at a large restaurant not far away. This point showed the difference between the crew and the one on the other side of the ocean. When Eric had participated in some film shoots in his previous life, most of the time, he would take a lunchbox from the logistics department and find a place to make do with it. This way of eating meant that the crew's expenses would increase. However, These small details were written in detail in the contract under the supervision of various Hollywood unions. As long as you wanted to make a movie in Hollywood, you had to compromise with the unions. Of course, there were also people who could sign subsidiary contracts to change these rules. However, this required enough strength and confidence. There were very few people in Hollywood who could do this. As far as Eric knew, Spielberg was one of them. He could even ask actors to sign a contract to waive the union salary standards and give them extremely low pay. However, in order to be able to work with Spielberg, most actors would often choose to compromise. With Eric's current strength in Hollywood, he also had the confidence to break the rules, but he had not yet encountered a time when he needed to do so. After taking some lunch, Eric and Catherine Bigelow chose a table to sit down at. Perhaps they felt that the director and producer had something to discuss, so the few actors present did not join in the fun. Although Gary Busey wanted to join in, he was pulled to their table by Patrick Swayze. "Little guy, I thought you wouldn't come to the set again." With no one around, Catherine Bigelow immediately changed the way she addressed Eric, which made him extremely depressed. "As a producer, isn't it a very reasonable thing for me to appear here?" "Of course, but when it was time for you to appear, you went to New York for more than a month. When you came back, the movie had already started filming," Catherine complained. "That's because I have something very important to do. Don't worry, I will come to the set often in the next period of time." Catherine Bigelow was obviously out of the circle, so she did not ask Eric how much money he made like others. The woman did not even ask what he was doing in New York. She just said, "Don't you need to prepare your own movie?" Eric swallowed the food in his mouth, wiped his mouth, and said, "I decided to take it slow. I have to give other film companies a way out." "Really, shameless boasting," Catherine Bigelow laughed, but when she thought of the results of Eric's previous movies, the woman suddenly realized that Eric's exaggerated words seemed to be very reasonable. According to the data released by the box office prediction agency, the summer release of Ghost was the only movie that may break $200 million in box office this year. "By the way, are you not going to direct Home Alone this year?" Eric shook his head and said, "I have completely handed over this project to someone else. I will not intervene in the future. At most, I will just be a producer. I have seen the second movie. It is very interesting." "Thank you for your recognition," Eric said. "But I found that your previous movies were too lacking in connotation. I think that making a movie should convey something to the audience, not just for entertainment. This is also the purpose of my choice to be a director. I originally studied painting, but then someone told me that movies can more easily convey one's ideas to others, unlike painting, which requires a certain amount of accumulation to understand the meaning." Eric shook his head. "I don't agree with you. My movies have always been conveying all kinds of information to the audience. It's just that these things are more subtle. Besides, I also think that this is the right way to convey it. The audience often only sees what they want to see, just like there are 1,000 Hamlets in the eyes of 1,000 readers. They will only accept the Hamlet in their mind. So, if you want to convey your point of view to the audience, you must resonate with them. In this way, you don't have to say it explicitly, and they can understand what you want to convey from your movie. Otherwise, no matter how clever the preaching is, it will often have the opposite effect. Just like Point Shock, which you are shooting now, I have carefully read the script several times. Do you know what I saw from your script?" Chapter 378. Catherine Bigelow temporarily stopped eating. Her originally straight waist leaned forward slightly. She placed her hands on the table, and her eyes were filled with curiosity. Although she always called Eric a little guy, it was only because she found out that Eric had some ideas about her. She ridiculed the young man in front of her with a sense of rejection. When it came to movies, anyone had to admit that Eric's actions in less than 3 years had exceeded the lifetime achievements of most filmmakers. Therefore, when Eric mentioned Point Shock, which she was currently filming, Catherine became serious. Eric said slowly, "What I see is loss and struggle. It's a strong sense of despair that some people feel when they can't break free from the shackles of the rules. Because of despair, Borty and his group became unscrupulous. They burned themselves crazily and then walked towards destruction. Because of despair, Angelo Papas became unmotivated. Like many numb people, he occasionally recalled the glory of the past and then died in a cowardly manner during an operation. Because of despair, Johnny Utah imprisoned himself on the path of pursuing Borty. Like a walking corpse, he finally found Borty and then walked into confusion again. It's really surprising. Catherine Bigelow widened her eyes slightly and said with some emotion, "I've asked Jim more than once about his feelings about the script. Then he just said, 'Oh dear, this story is great.' So you see, even the people around you find it difficult to understand the script and the deeper meaning, let alone the ordinary audience. Their attention is often only on the surfing and skydiving scenes that make people's adrenaline soar. After watching it, they will feel that this is a very cool story. As for the dissatisfaction with the rigid social system and the desire for change that the film wants to convey, 90% of the audience won't be able to understand." Catherine Bigelow frowned and revealed a thoughtful expression. After a moment, she asked in disappointment, "Why is it like this?" "It's very simple. It's because you don't have enough influence." Catherine glared at Eric. "I know I can't compare to you, little guy. Are you happy now?" "I'm serious. If you have enough influence, then people will naturally pay more attention to your works. They will deconstruct and analyze your works on a deeper level. Then, the ideas you want to express will be understood by people. Take Jim's Terminator as an example. In the eyes of many fans and media, this sensational work, under the sci-fi appearance, expressed the accusation of mankind's endless development of nuclear weapons and the worry of nuclear war. Wasn't it a very tragic theme? But many people know that this is not the case at all. The inspiration for Terminator was actually a nightmare Jim had in a small hotel in Rome due to a high fever. Initially, Kathleen kept nodding her head, but when it came to Terminator, the woman found what Eric said very interesting. She could not help but laugh out loud. "I'll definitely tell Jim what you said today when I have time." Eric thought to himself, "Then you definitely don't have much of a chance." The early stage of Terminator 2 was already prepared, and filming would start in early September. After Eric returned from New York, he also attended a meeting with the main creators of Terminator 2. From the way Cameron and Linda Hamilton looked at each other, the cliché story between the Playboy director and the sexy female lead had already begun. It was estimated that the day when Terminator 2 was finished would be the day Cameron and Kathleen would part ways. Of course, Eric did not intend to tell Kathleen about this in advance. Otherwise, it would be instigated. Even if Cameron was at fault, it would definitely arouse the woman's disgust. "I think Jim will definitely agree with me," Eric replied with a smile, then returned to the previous topic. "So, if you don't want to be a movie director who is unpopular, you need to expand your influence as much as possible. There are many ways, such as shooting controversial movies, producing movies with high box office, or directing award-winning movies, etc. But shooting controversial movies is very risky. If you don't pay attention, it will backfire and arouse public disgust. So, I think the latter two methods are more practical." Kathleen Bigelow shook her head, and there was some envy in her teasing tone. "These methods are easier for you. You're a little monster." Eric smiled. "Okay, I'll take it as a compliment. Actually, I just want to say that I have a script here that can bring you enough influence. If you finish shooting this movie, I think any movie you make next will attract enough attention. I just don't know if you dare to take it." Dare not?" Kathleen Bigelow asked word by word. She stared at Eric and said, "Little guy, are you discriminating against me because I'm a woman?" Eric said, "At least in my memory, no female director has shot a similar theme." "Stop, let me guess." Kathleen Bigelow was interested. She rested her chin on her hand and thought for a while. Then she asked tentatively, "Female directors rarely touch, like Basic Instinct, which you wrote?" "Of course not. Many female directors in Europe are more open than Basic Instinct." "Then, a Western?" "No." "Oh, yes. I specially watched the MV you shot for the song Reach. I really like your Western cowgirl look in it. It's very cool, it makes people. Shut up, don't tease me. Kathleen glared at Eric, but there was a faint smile at the corner of her mouth. Obviously, she was not disgusted by Eric's words. Let me think about it. Eric shrugged and said, Okay, I'll give you a hint. What do you think the Americans and the entire Western society are most concerned about in the next few months? Of course it's the Middle East. There's going to be a war. You're not asking me to shoot a war movie, are you? Eric snapped his fingers and ignored the curious gazes around him. He said, Bingo, and it's definitely not a small war movie. It's a World War II epic movie. There's no limit to investment. You can spend as much money as you want. There's enough time. I plan to release it on June 6, 1994. That day happens to be the 50th anniversary of the Normandy landing. So, do you dare to take it? Kathleen Bigelow hesitated for a moment. If Eric was serious, then the investment for this movie would definitely be several times that of Flashpoint. She was different from Cameron. Compared to Cameron's desperate fanaticism, Kathleen Bigelow was more persistent about movies. She liked to shoot movies and use movies to express her views. However, she also understood that if she failed after taking on this big production, it would likely mean a long period of silence for a female director, or even a permanent departure from Hollywood. Eric, can you talk about the script first? Kathleen finally failed to resist the temptation. However, she still asked this question first. If Eric's script was completely not to her liking, then she could naturally turn down this invitation. Eric had a panoramic view of the changes in Kathleen's expression. He was still very confident that the script he had chosen would be able to satisfy Kathleen. For this reason, he carefully analyzed Kathleen Bigelow's previous works, as well as the Oscar-winning The Hurt Locker and the subsequent Hunting Bin Laden. Many of Kathleen Bigelow's works had a very strong personal style. Among them, whether it was the early Ruthless or the latest Hunting Bin Laden in Eric's memory, they all carried a kind of calm despair. Although the Hunting Bin Laden in his memory and the current Flashpoint were 20 years apart, the male and female protagonists of the two movies eventually reached the same destination. They both completed their missions. One threw away the FBI badge, and the other shed tears of joy. Even for The Hurt Locker, which won the Best Director award, William went around in circles and set foot on the battlefield again. However, Eric had chosen a story about hope. Despair and hope seemed to be two extremes, but they were often as close as brothers. It's a story of 8 saving one, Eric said. On June 6, 1944, after the Normandy landings, 3 of the 4 Ryan brothers died on the battlefield at the same time. Their mothers received 3 death notices on the same day, and the youngest son of the family, James Ryan, sneaked into the enemy's rear with the airborne troops. It's unknown whether he's dead or alive. In order to leave a glimmer of hope for this grieving mother, the military sent a team of 8 people led by Lieutenant Miller to sneak into the war zone in an attempt to find James Ryan and take him away from the battlefield. Eric was quite eloquent. In addition, he had the complete film in his mind, so he narrated the entire story. Kathleen also maintained a serious expression as she listened attentively. She did not realize that the number of people in the restaurant had unknowingly decreased by a lot. The assistant director in charge of arranging the shooting schedule saw that the 2 of them were engrossed in their conversation, so he did not go forward to remind them that it was almost time to shoot. In Eric's opinion, Saving Private Ryan was not a completely American-themed movie. At least, it was very different from the ones he had seen before. The movie truly showed the cruelty and tragedy of the Normandy landing site. It portrayed the image of a group of ordinary soldiers with distinct personalities. The 8 of them were full of doubts and disputes about their mission from beginning to end. Some of the characters might have been asking why in their hearts until their deaths. Kathryn Bigelow, who was still an artistic young woman at heart, was obviously very moved by this kind of movie, which contained the interrogation of war and the portrayal of human nature. She also understood that as a woman, if she could make such a war epic movie, the sensation it would cause would definitely be worldwide. As a female director who was discriminated against in Hollywood, the competitive Kathleen Bigelow's desire to prove herself was stronger than many people's. In the face of the woman's tempted expression, Eric said patiently like a salesman. "How about it, Kathleen? Do you want to take on this script? Although you haven't made a movie with such a big scene before, this is not a problem because it's scheduled to be released on the 50th anniversary of the Normandy landing. From now to June 6, 1994, you have nearly 4 years to concentrate on making this movie. 4 years is enough for you to prepare everything perfectly." Kathleen Bigelow did not answer immediately. Instead, she asked, "According to what you said, the investment of this movie is estimated to be more than twice that of Thriller Point. Aren't you afraid that I'll screw up this project? If I screw it up, I'll pay with my body." Eric thought evilly in his heart, but he said, "Of course I'm not afraid. I believe in your ability. Besides, you have me. If you're like many Hollywood producers who always interfere with the production of movies, I won't take on this movie. As long as you approve of the script I wrote, then I won't interfere too much with the production of this movie. I'm just saying that when the production of the movie encounters difficulties, I'll help in time. However, I believe that 4 years is enough to solve all the problems. Then you'd better write the script for me to see first." Kathleen Bigelow noticed that there were only a few people in the restaurant. She stood up and said, "It's time to work. Then I'll write the script as soon as possible." Eric also stood up, and the two walked out of the restaurant side by side. In the following days, Eric often appeared on the set of Thriller Point. The script for Saving Private Ryan was successfully completed a week later. Eric handed the first draft of the script to Kathleen. The woman was obviously more interested after reading it. She also put forward a lot of suggestions for changes. Eric was happy to agree to some minor details, but when it came to the core of the script, Eric would not make too big of a concession. Instead, he argued with Kathleen. Therefore, during the filming, the crew members often saw the director and producer discussing something in a whisper. Occasionally, they would fall into disputes. This situation made many people a little nervous. They were afraid that this kind of dispute would affect the filming of the movie. However, their worries were obviously superfluous. By the end of September, the filming progress of the movie had come to an end. Eric and Kathleen did not have any sharp conflicts. For a month, in addition to paying attention to the filming of Thriller Point, Eric also paid attention to the situation in New York almost every day. During this period, he also flew to New York 2 or 3 times. It was October. After 2 months of deployment, the number of U.S. troops that had arrived in the Persian Gulf had reached 500,000. A war was almost inevitable. The international price of crude oil successfully broke through the high of $40 in the early days of October. However, with the gradual increase of the military strength of the U.S. military in the Persian Gulf, as well as the various measures introduced by the U.S. and Saudi Arabia to stabilize crude oil prices, the growth of crude oil prices stagnated after reaching a high of $40. According to convention, most people felt that the next round of crude oil prices should be at the moment of the outbreak of war. However, Eric knew that after the outbreak of war, with the offensive of the United Nations Army, the price of crude oil not only did not rise, but it also fell. However, this should be next year. Now, it was time to count the first round of harvest. Chapter 379. In Chris's office at Firefly Investment Company, he was sorting out the last futures delivery sheet. He raised his head and said to Eric, "When money reaches a certain level, it can really make people numb." In July, Chris didn't have a good rest for a whole month because he suddenly had to deal with a huge sum of $700 million. He was always on tenterhooks, worried that he would lose the money. However, after the war in Kuwait broke out in August, the funds in his futures account skyrocketed day by day. Chris didn't feel much about it. Eric sat on the sofa with a statistical report in his hand. He read the profit data on it and said, "Some people say that when wealth reaches a certain level, it's just a number. But I think that's too pretentious. Huge wealth also means huge power and extraordinary social status. You can also enjoy social resources that ordinary people can't reach. It is precisely because rich people can experience the enormous power that wealth brings that so many people will spend their entire lives endlessly pursuing more wealth." Chris shook his head with a smile. Eric, if I don't look at your face, I always feel like I'm talking to a middle-aged man who understands the world. Eric touched his smooth cheeks and smiled. It seems that I should try growing a beard. It will make me look more mature. But they don't like the way I look when I have a beard. I've been complained more than once because I forgot to shave. Wow, them. Chris emphasized the last word. Although them and them were the same in English, it was easy to tell what Eric was talking about from his tone. I really don't know how you deal with so many women. I can't even handle Emily alone. This means that Emily is very lucky. She met a good man, Eric said flatteringly. Chris and Jeffrey's personalities were very similar. They were as cautious in relationships as Jeffrey. He was dating Emily Brighton with the intention of getting married. Emily Brighton was obviously aware of this as well. Although they hadn't spent much time together, Eric realized that Emily cherished their relationship very much. However, Eric also discovered that Chris and Emily were very strong-willed people. If they wanted to be together for a long time, one of them would have to accommodate the other, just like Jeffrey and his deceased wife. From Jeffrey's memories, it could be seen that Jeffrey had always been the protector of his wife. Thank you, Eric. Let's talk about the matter at hand. What do you plan to do with the money? Eric glanced at the figures on the statistical report again. 675 billion. This was the final profit after deducting all kinds of commissions and fees. As a kind of speculative trading, the fees for futures trading included all kinds of taxes. Therefore, this money completely belonged to Eric, and he didn't even have to pay a high personal income tax. This was what made Eric most excited. Otherwise, even though the money was easy to come by, the 35% personal income tax deduction could still drive him crazy. It's still not enough. Many things in the plan can't be carried out. I originally thought that since the price of crude oil has doubled, then with 10 times the leverage, we would at least be able to make double the profit. I didn't expect that it would only be half of what I expected. If we didn't enter the market so much earlier and have a competitor take over, let alone 5 times the initial capital, we might not even be able to make half of the initial capital. Although the price of crude oil has doubled in the past 2 months, after August, it would be a joke if people who enter the market could make more than double the initial capital. Futures are different from stocks, after all. Futures are a kind of betting contract. With crude oil prices soaring, not many people would be stupid enough to short it in a short period of time. Of course I understand. I'm just lamenting. It seems that we can only look forward to the end of the war and short it again. Chris looked at Eric speechlessly. You are really greedy. If a person can get such an opportunity in their life, they are already at the level of being kissed by the goddess of luck. Many people know that the price of crude oil will definitely fall when the war ends, but the war hasn't started yet. Who can predict when the war will end? Decades ago, the Korean War and the Vietnam War were fought for several years. Most people are guessing that this war will be fought for several years. Eric smiled confidently. This expression was caught by Chris. He remembered that a few months ago, Eric thought that a war would break out in the Middle East. Chris suddenly thought of another possibility. He couldn't help but move closer and ask curiously, Eric, you don't have any premonitions this time, do you? More or less, but this is not a premonition. It is my speculation based on reality. I think that this war will definitely not be as long as the wars from decades ago. If you pay attention to the relevant news, you will find that this war will be a high-tech war. The human wave tactics from decades ago will not play a big role. So, it is useless for Saddam to have millions of troops. What's more, Saddam no longer has the support of the Soviet Union. In the previous wars, the real opponents were not only those few small countries. Of course, I have read a lot of information. But I did not find the high-tech war you are talking about. Chris shook his head and said, Forget it. Let's not talk about this. Even if it is like what you said, war is not something that can be fought in a day or two. By then, we should have enough time to plan. Let's talk about the money. What do you mean by it is not enough? Last year, Sony spent more than $5 billion to acquire Columbia. More than a month ago, Japan's Matsushita spent $6 billion to acquire Universal Pictures' parent company, MCA. Now, I only have about $3 billion US. Of course, it is not enough. Chris immediately understood Eric's plan. You are planning to acquire a big film company? Of course. That is why I said the money is not enough. Now, acquiring any big film company will cost at least $5 billion. If you want MGM, I think Kirk Cochran will be more than happy to sell it to you for $5 billion, Chris joked. Thinking about the current situation of MGM, Eric had a sarcastic smile on his face. I don't buy rubbish. MGM has been ruined by that casino tycoon. More than half of their film library has been taken away. Their distribution channels have shrunk. The company does not have any valuable film rights. Even their properties have been used by that tycoon to do hotel business. I don't think MGM has any value left. Chapter 380. MGM has been around for almost 70 years. The brand itself is valuable, Chris said. Then, he shook his head. But it's not worth much. Which company do you want? Columbia and Universal are definitely out of the picture. The Japanese just bought them and are rubbing their hands together, preparing for a big fight. Warner can't even think about it. The only ones left are Disney, Paramount, and Fox. Well, Fox is out of the picture too. They have News Corporation behind them. Now there are only Disney and Paramount. Disney is in a period of rapid growth. So, you want Paramount? Eric asked. Why not Disney? Chris looked surprised. Disney is now in a period of rapid growth. Its development momentum is so good. What's more, the CEO of Disney is Michael Eisner. After the incident at the beginning of the year, although you have reconciled on the surface, if you want to buy Disney, Michael Eisner will definitely know what will happen to him. He will do his best to stop you. Thinking of how Paramount, which relied on Viacom in his previous life, was surpassed in performance by the second-tier Lionsgate Pictures, and even became a burden to Viacom, Eric shook his head. It's easy to buy Paramount. I think the shareholders will be happy to sell it to me. But Paramount is not a good choice. The development of this company is not in line with my plan. Its business scope is too limited to film production. But Disney is different. The business strategy of Disney's entire industrial chain is very suitable for me to expand my territory in Hollywood in the future. If you insist, you may have to spend more money than the two major Japanese consortiums, Chris said while thinking about the limited information about Disney in his memory. He then said, Disney's current market value is about $4 billion US. If you want to buy Disney, you can only use the hostile acquisition method. You'll have to pay a premium of at least 50%. Without $6 billion US, it will be very difficult to buy Disney. If we don't make a move now, we won't be able to buy Disney in a few years, Eric said. With the rapid development of the American economy and the rise of Hollywood in the world, the market value of several major Hollywood film companies increased by more than 30% every year. Even the declining MGM was sold at a high price of more than $5 billion US after more than a decade. In his memory, Viacom spent $10 billion US to acquire Paramount 3 years later. Now, Paramount could only be sold at a price of $6 billion US, like the parent company of Universal Pictures. Although Barry Diller's sniping was a factor in the deal, it also reflected the skyrocketing market value of the 7 major film companies as Hollywood expanded. With the development potential of Firefly, it would take at most 5 years for it to be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with any of the big 7. However, Eric also knew that if things were allowed to continue to develop, after 5 years, the big 7 film companies would have basically completed the integration with the media group. Of course, during this process, Firefly would definitely be recruited by the media group. However, this was not what Eric wanted. He wanted to be the master, not the subordinate of others. Therefore, now that there was an opportunity, Eric would of course take down a major film company as the most important bargaining chip. In the future, through various financing methods, he would develop himself into a media group instead of being recruited. In his previous life, the only company that developed into a media group with its own strength was Disney. Time Warner could only be considered half of it. If we want to buy Disney, then we have to start preparing now, Chris thought for a while and said. The first thing we have to do is to absorb Disney shares and get the right to speak on Disney's board of directors. Next, because we don't need to pay all the money in one go, the $3.6 billion in cash is enough. Moreover, if necessary, we can also raise funds. With Firefly's performance over the past 2 years, I think any investment bank on Wall Street would be happy to participate in this investment. Even many of Disney's shareholders probably want equity more than cash. Eric listened to Chris' analysis while he took a pen and wrote something on the coffee table. When Chris finished speaking, Eric had already filled out a check and handed it over. He said, "Let's not talk about this first. Chris, this is your bonus." Chris took the check and glanced at it. He quickly pushed it back and said, "It's too much. This is what you deserve. If it weren't for your help, I definitely wouldn't have made so much profit during this oil crisis," Eric said as he reached out and blocked Chris's movement. "I really can't take so much. I know how much what I'm doing is worth." Chris shook his head firmly and added, "And if Dad knows, he definitely won't agree." When it came to Jeffrey, Eric thought for a while and said, "How about this? I'll exchange this money for Firefly's shares. 3%, the same as your father's share in Firefly Film." Chris thought for a while and finally nodded. Firefly's main asset now was only 23% of Cisco's shares. With Cisco's current market value, 3% was not too much. It was much less than the money Eric gave him. However, Eric knew what kind of behemoth Cisco would develop into in the future, so he didn't think it was too little. What's more, he could increase Chris's share in the future. If he gave too much at one time, what if he couldn't afford it in the future? Although Chris's character was now introverted and calm, and the two had a good relationship, no one knew what would happen in the future as time passed. In his previous life, Michael Eisner went from a wise leader who brought Disney to the peak to a headstrong Disney tyrant. In the end, he lost the support of the people and was kicked out by the board of directors. "Since you have just proposed some plans, then this matter will be handled by you. From now on, start to absorb Disney's shares." Eric chatted with Chris, but in his heart, he thought of the rotten egg that had not been touched yet. Cutthroat Island. It would be great if he could throw Cutthroat Island to Disney. This summer, Disney had lost hundreds of millions of dollars. It was estimated that it would be difficult to reverse the loss in the second half of the year. If he could throw Cutthroat Island to Disney, then this project could make Disney lose another $100 million. 2 consecutive years of losses were enough to seriously weaken Michael Eisner's prestige in Disney and weaken Michael Eisner's control of the board of directors. Then, after the acquisition plan was launched, things would be much simpler. However, Michael Eisner was not a fool. This matter was very troublesome to handle. Thinking in his heart, Eric quickly thought of Robert Shea. Since the storm at the beginning of the year, Robert Shea and Michael Eisner had been very close. Maybe he could start from this point. Chapter 381. Eric and Chris spent a few hours discussing the detailed plan to absorb Disney shares from the secondary market. Chris put away the handwritten memo. Seeing that Eric was about to leave, he suddenly remembered something and stopped him. "Eric, there's something I almost forgot to tell you." When Eric sat down again, Chris said, "In August, the board of directors of Cisco passed a resolution to remove the founders of Cisco, Mr. and Mrs. Gray. The 2 of them have now left the company." Chris got up and found a folder from the filing cabinet and handed it to Eric. Eric opened it and saw that it was a resolution of the Cisco board of directors in mid-August. After reading it, Eric looked up and asked, "What's going on?" "The Grays feel that the current management of Cisco is too focused on profits, which is not in line with their original intention of founding Cisco. They have made several arguments about this. When I went to Cisco's mid-year meeting in June, I happened to run into them once." The couple pointed at the CEO of the company, Morgan Ritchie, and scolded him. The meeting was delayed for 3 hours because of this. In August, the company management couldn't take it anymore and threatened the board of directors with collective resignation. In the end, the proposal to remove the Greys from their positions in Cisco was passed. Chris briefly explained the whole matter and said with slight contempt on his face, "In fact, the reason why they are like this has nothing to do with the company's management strategy. The couple has been holding a grudge over losing control of Cisco." "I understand. Unless it threatens our interests, we should try not to interfere with the management of Cisco." Chris nodded and said, "I understand, but I want to talk about what happened next. After Mr. and Mrs. Gray left Cisco, they revealed that they were going to sell their stocks. I think you might be interested in that. It just so happens that we have enough funds now." Eric recalled Cisco's shares and revealed an excited expression. After Cisco went public, the founders, Mr. and Mrs. Gray, held 27.6% of Cisco's shares and were still Cisco's largest shareholders. Sequoia Capital, which had originally invested in Cisco, held 23.5% of the shares and ranked second. Firefly Investments held 23% of the shares, and the remaining 30% of the shares were scattered among institutional investors and the company's management. Although Cisco was a listed company, because the market was not optimistic about Cisco's development prospects when it was listed, most of the shares that Cisco sold were only subscribed by investment institutions. The shares that flowed into the secondary market were very few, and the plan to increase their shares through the circulation market was not feasible at all. And because of Cisco's good performance after being listed, the investors who had already obtained the shares were not willing to sell them easily. Therefore, the Gray couple's sale of their shares was definitely the only opportunity to increase their shares on a large scale. If they could take over all the shares in the Gray couple's hands, Firefly's investment would be equivalent to having absolute control over Cisco. This was Eric's dream. "How much are they offering?" Eric directly asked the most important question with a tone of determination. Chris could understand what Eric was thinking. As the manager of Firefly's investment, he knew Cisco's situation better than Eric. He shook his head and smiled. "Eric, you may be disappointed. The Gray couple is not selling all of their shares. They are only willing to sell 2/3 of the shares, which is about 18%. They are offering $250 million, which is 30% higher than the market price, so now most of the interested investors are negotiating with the Gray couple. I estimate that the final transaction price will not exceed $200 million. Contact the Gray couple as soon as possible. We must get these shares. Anyway, we have enough funds now, so it doesn't matter if it's a little expensive." Eric thought for a while and said, "In this case, tell the Gray couple that if they are willing to sell all of their shares, we will buy them at the 30% premium they offered." "I will pass on the message, but the possibility is not high. If the couple didn't need funds to start another business, they probably wouldn't even sell the 18% shares." "There's no loss in trying," Eric nodded and said. In the past few days when Eric came to New York again, the international price of crude oil reached an unprecedented high of $41 per barrel. Almost at the same time, Western countries, together with several major oil-exporting countries in the Middle East, began to introduce various effective measures to stabilize crude oil prices. First, Saudi Arabia announced that it would increase its domestic crude oil production to 100% to meet market demand. North America and Europe also began to use their crude oil reserves to stabilize the market. In addition, the United Nations Army led by the U.S. military was fully deployed in the Persian Gulf. All the troops exceeded 600,000, and they formed a comprehensive suppression of Iraq in terms of weapons and equipment. Under the influence of various bad news, crude oil prices began to slowly fall. Even Eric himself didn't expect that his trip to New York would be so coincidental. It just happened to be when crude oil prices fell after reaching their highest point. Therefore, after returning to Los Angeles again, all kinds of probes swarmed again. Without exception, they were all trying to pry into his profits from this oil crisis. In the process of operating crude oil futures, Eric's capital of up to $500 million was temporarily borrowed from the 7 major film companies. In the end, the 7 major film companies received nothing except for the loan and a dispensable interest. Therefore, some people's desire to know how much money they earned was very strong. It seemed that as long as they knew the results, their disappointment would be appeased. Of course, Eric wouldn't reveal specific information to provoke those people. He couldn't do such an inhumane thing. When faced with such probes, Eric often avoided the topic with a few words. Therefore, some people had to turn their attention to the movements of Eric's companies, hoping to get some information from them. But as the days passed, except for the plan of the Praia Vista filming base revealed by some employees of Firefly, there was only the announcement of Firefly's investment of $210 million to acquire 18% of the shares of Cisco's founders, the Gray couple. Other than that, Eric didn't seem to have made any big moves. Although when negotiating with the Praia Vista community officials, Eric said that he would invest $1 billion, people with discerning eyes could see that the filming base in Praia Vista couldn't spend that much money. Not to mention, the project cycle was a few years long and the first investment was at most $100 million. This kind of calm small matter made many people feel a little more at ease. They comforted themselves by guessing that Eric probably didn't make too much money. As October slowly passed, Hollywood was once again about to usher in the New Year's Eve. The major film companies had already started the promotion of the New Year's major films. The executives of the 7 major film companies were a little relieved to find that Eric didn't have any films that he personally directed this year, except for the one he produced, Thriller. Firefly only had a total of 2 films released at the end of the year. In addition to Thriller, there was another film produced by Robert Shea, Ghost Detective. This work imitated the thriller style of Ghostbusters, and was a film that Eric had never heard of before. Probably due to the butterfly effect, the film's investment reached $40 million. According to the agreement between Robert Shea and Eric, Firefly accounted for a quarter of the investment. Firefly's Home Alone series, which had been the main series for 2 consecutive years, didn't produce a sequel this year. The main reason was that Stewart's agency, CAA, proposed a sky-high salary of $15 million, which was almost double last year's salary. Also, Runkle and his wife seemed to be enlightened this time. They didn't interfere wantonly and left the negotiations to CAA. If they accepted CAA's offer, coupled with the price increase of the other lead actors, the cost of forcibly producing a sequel would reach $25 million. The total cost of the sequel would exceed $50 million. Including the post-production marketing budget, the film would need $140 million at the box office to recoup the cost. Based on the previous 2 films' declining box office, the possibility of a loss was very high. Eric didn't think too much and temporarily cut off the sequel's production plan. On the day Firefly announced that they were suspending the Home Alone series, Stewart's agent immediately called to make concessions. However, Eric, who was busy with futures trading at the time, had no intention of arguing with CAA again. He directly rejected the other party. Firefly wasn't like some film companies that relied heavily on a film series, so they didn't need to be too accommodating to the film's main creators. Since some people didn't know what was good for them and asked for an exorbitant price, they should have the awareness to swallow their broken teeth. Shock Point wrapped up in mid-October and was expected to take a month to complete post-production. However, Eric didn't get close to Catherine Bigelow these days because the paparazzi caught Cameron and Linda Hamilton's affair and the photos were published in the newspapers. Catherine rushed to the set of Terminator 2 in New Mexico on the day the news was revealed. After Cameron admitted it himself, the woman divorced Cameron without any hesitation. However, Cameron wasn't an unmarried director after all. As a married man, having an affair with the female lead might affect the box office of Terminator 2 if word got out. Therefore, the two agreed to wait until Terminator 2 was released before announcing the divorce. Although the matter was temporarily hidden from the media, many people knew about it. As an investor of the 2 movies, Eric certainly knew. As a very vicious woman, Catherine Bigelow didn't marry Cameron until she was 35 years old because she admired his talent. She didn't expect that the marriage would last less than 3 years before her husband cheated. It would be difficult for any woman to accept this. Although Catherine was still calm, capable, and meticulous in her work during this period, and didn't seem to be affected by the breakup of her marriage, when Eric appeared, the woman's eyes would occasionally turn gloomy. She looked at him with a gaze that said, "Any playboy in the world should be fried." This feeling sent a chill down Eric's spine. He didn't want to be the scapegoat for Cameron's mess, so he simply let go of Shock Point for the time being. Chapter 382. Since August, Robert Shea had a premonition of a crisis. From the moment Eric did not let him participate in any matters related to the filming base in Praia Vista, Robert Shea was already aware of this matter. This reminded him of what happened to Barry Diller 6 years ago. Barry Diller brought Paramount to the peak, but because of a conflict with Martin Davis, the major shareholder of Paramount, he was almost driven out of Paramount Pictures in the end. However, in the past few years, Paramount's declining performance and Fox's rising prosperity also proved that Martin Davis had made a big mistake back then. Robert Shea still had some self-awareness. He knew that he was not as capable as Barry Diller, but he also knew that he had an advantage that Barry Diller did not have. That was the 25% shares in Firefly in his hands, and most of the employees in Firefly were his subordinates when he was new. Robert Shea had always been very confident that if Eric forced him out, the damage to Firefly would be much greater than the loss to Paramount caused by Barry Diller's departure. Therefore, even though he felt the crisis, Robert Shea did not think that Eric would dare to go too far. In fact, he also understood that Eric wanted him to let go of the production business and only participate in the distribution business. However, in any film company, the production power was the object of contention for the top management. If he only let him be in charge of the distribution business and not participate in the other businesses of the company, how different would he be from a distribution manager? After another day of work, Robert Shea stood up and stretched his body. Looking at his watch, it was almost 5 o'clock. He gave a few instructions to his assistant, then habitually packed his things, put on his coat, and left the office to go home. Robert Shea's office was adjacent to Eric's. When he walked past Eric's office, Robert Shea glanced at the nameplate on the door and wondered with a little dissatisfaction if Eric had left the company early this time. He walked along the long corridor to the elevator. When he approached the corner where the elevator was, Robert Shea subconsciously stopped because he heard Eric's voice. In the beginning, it was just some casual chit-chat. Robert Shea soon lost interest and was about to walk over, but when he raised his foot, Robert Shea pricked up his ears and heard Eric say, "This time, there must not be another accident like Ghost. You will be personally in charge of this matter. Find an agency to contact Bruce Evans. You must successfully get that script. Don't worry, Eric. I know what to do. Nothing will go wrong this time." This was the voice of Eric's assistant, Alan Fissman. Eric said again, "It's better to be careful. Don't offer too high a price. If it's too high, it will arouse the other party's vigilance." The two of them exchanged a few more words before Robert Shea heard a soft ding. After light footsteps, there was no sound from the elevator. After a while, Robert Shea walked over and looked at the elevator on the left, which was slowly going down. He had a thoughtful expression on his face. At the same time, he also remembered Bruce Evans's name. Robert Shea immediately decided to find someone to inquire about this screenwriter. After the elevator began to go down, Eric and Alan looked at each other and smiled. They could see a figure on the wall at the corner of the elevator. Although it was blurry, Eric and Alan had already noticed Robert Shea as soon as he walked out of the office. Moreover, it was enough to only reveal Bruce Evans's name. Bruce Evans was not a nobody. This screenwriter had already produced several movies. Of course, the script had to be completed. Next, they had to send someone to contact Bruce Evans and act like he had obtained the script for Throat Cutter Island. Let him leave with some hope. It can save the company a lot of trouble, Eric suddenly said when the elevator was about to slide to the top floor. Eric, why do I feel that this script is not bad? A good script may not necessarily make a good movie. Even if a good movie is made, it may not necessarily be recognized by the audience. Alan nodded thoughtfully. The two of them came to the parking lot together. Eric had just opened the door when his mobile phone rang. "Then I'll go back first," Alan said. Eric nodded and picked up the phone. A woman's voice came out, "Eric, my reputation is completely ruined." "Don't worry, I will never take responsibility." Eric laughed a few times and then said, "Fox's Little Princess, I think this title is very classy. You've been really good these days." It had to be said that Elizabeth was really into her role during this period. She played the role of an arrogant rich girl who desperately wanted an Oscar. The girl even went to Martin Scorsese's cocktail party for Goodfellas, and personally Martin Scorsese not to apply for Best Picture for Goodfellas, and only apply for Best Director. As long as Martin Scorsese agreed to this condition, she could contact Fox's resources to do award PR for Martin Scorsese. Compared to Best Director, Elizabeth valued the Best Picture award more. Once The Silence of the Lambs won, she would get an Oscar as the producer. Almost everyone in Hollywood knew that Martin Scorsese was very disliked by the Oscar jury. Therefore, the chances of his movie winning Best Director were much lower than the chances of winning Best Picture. Elizabeth's suggestion almost poked Martin's sore spot. Martin Scorsese was so angry that he almost exploded on the spot. As the news spread, Elizabeth also received the nickname Fox's Little Princess. "Bah, you bastard, it's all your fault. What Fox's Little Princess? Everyone knows that's sarcasm." Elizabeth raised her voice and complained, then said, "I signed a contract with the producers of Dances with Wolves in the afternoon. The price was not negotiated, so I spent $27.5 million. Orion Pictures also bought out their distribution contract for $2 million. You didn't see it, but the way those guys looked at me was almost like they were writing the word sucker on their faces. I worked so hard, and now I'm left with $500,000 pocket money. This can't be, you have to compensate me. Can I pay with my body? I happen to be free tonight. Get lost." Eric stopped joking and said, "Okay, where are you now? I'll go over and take a look at the sample. I haven't seen this movie yet." "Of course I'm at home." After Elizabeth said this, she quickly added, "But it's too late now. Let's talk about it tomorrow. I stored the original copy in Fox's vault. They must have gotten off work in Century City." Chapter 383. On both sides of Sunset Boulevard, which was more than 10 kilometers long, connecting the 101 freeway and the 405 freeway in Los Angeles, there were numerous residential areas. Among them, there were manor-style mansions with an area of several acres, and ordinary villa areas that were tightly packed together. This was the world-famous Beverly Hills, where a large number of Hollywood stars lived. As it was near the end of the year, Firefly's affairs were complicated. In order to save time, Eric did not return to the Point Corner Manor. Even if the road conditions were good, it would take more than an hour to drive from Burbank to Malibu. Therefore, after returning from New York, Eric lived in Beverly Hills most of the time. Although he had not achieved the great or wretched goal of having a golden house to hide his mistress anywhere in Los Angeles, he still had several places to stay in Beverly Hills. Opening his eyes, the faint fragrance in the bedroom made Eric involuntarily take a deep breath. The curtains were tightly drawn, and the light in the bedroom was still a little dim. However, it was already 7:30. After a brief haze, Eric quickly sat up, got dressed, and washed up. Hearing the noise, Joanna Paku, who was making breakfast, had just turned her head, but Eric had already hugged her waist. The woman raised her chin slightly and smiled. "Good morning, Eric." Eric stroked the woman's waist, which was tightly wrapped in a knitted wool skirt, and lowered his head to kiss the woman's lips. "Good morning. Why aren't you wearing an apron? Your clothes will get dirty." "It'll be fine if you're careful," the woman said, and gently patted Eric's strange hand that was hugging her waist. "No, I'm making breakfast. The newspaper is on the coffee table in the living room. You can eat after reading the newspaper for a while." Eric laughed and was about to continue when he heard a hurried ringtone in the living room. It was his mobile phone. "It's so early in the morning." Eric complained in a low voice, but still walked out of the kitchen to answer the phone. It was Elizabeth, informing him to go to Century City to watch the sample of Dances with Wolves in the morning. After hanging up the phone, Eric didn't go to the kitchen to disturb the woman who was making breakfast. Instead, he opened the newspaper on the tea table and started reading. After Joanna finished making breakfast, Eric walked into the dining room with a copy of Los Angeles Times. After the woman served breakfast and sat down across from him, Eric said, "Joan, it's Thanksgiving next month. Can you move to Malibu and spend it with me?" Joanna Pakula raised her head and said, "I want to go back to Poland for the new year." Poland had been in a state of turmoil over the years. Joanna had immigrated to the United States as a refugee. After the upheaval in Eastern Europe, the political situation in Poland had barely stabilized since last year. However, Eric was still worried. "Why don't we wait for another 2 years? It's still very chaotic over there." Chow Anna shook her head. "I can't wait any longer. I haven't seen my parents for almost 10 years. I received the photo a month ago. They are old." Hearing the deep sadness in the woman's voice, Eric didn't try to persuade her anymore. 10 years was indeed too long for a woman who was wandering alone in a foreign land. Eric suddenly thought of himself. He didn't even know if he could be considered a stranger wandering in a foreign land, let alone when he could go back to take a look. "Then I'll arrange for a few people to go back with you," Eric said after thinking for a while. Joanna was about to shake her head when Eric said, "Don't refuse. It's no use. It's settled." "You're always like this," the woman complained softly. Her tone was indifferent, without the slightest hint of anger. It was the end of October in Los Angeles. The temperature in the morning had dropped to about 10 degrees. After breakfast, Joanna took Eric's coat and watched the man put it on. She then considerately helped him button it up like a gentle wife. Eric walked to the yard and opened the car door. Seeing Joanna's reluctant look, he stepped forward and hugged the gentle woman in front of him. "Don't be like this. It's my fault. I didn't think that Tornado would only start shooting next year. How about I ask your agent to help you choose a film? That way, you won't be too bored." "No, I like this quiet life very much." Joanna quickly shook her head and explained. Then she whispered, "Will you still come over tonight?" "Of course. Before you go back to Poland, I'll come over to accompany you," Eric replied without hesitation. The woman finally sounded a little excited. "Then I'll cook for you tonight. I've signed up for a cooking class recently." Eric smiled and teased, "I hope you're not my guinea pig." Joanna's villa was less than 5 kilometers away from Fox's headquarters in Century City. Several high-rise buildings in Century City were almost all properties of Fox. Eric drove to the place very quickly. After parking the car, Eric walked to the agreed office building. Just as he walked not far from the entrance, a slim figure in a khaki trench coat ran towards him. "Eric, so you're really coming today?" The woman in front of him was Jennifer Connolly. Eric hugged the woman who rushed over and asked in surprise, "Jenny, why are you here?" Connolly took Eric's arm and said with a smile, "The crew of Condor Anti informed me that some scenes needed dubbing, so I came over. The director just told me that you would be here today." Eric felt a little strange. Although he knew who the director of Condor Anti was, the two of them had never met. Before he could figure it out, Eric keenly noticed that behind a business car not far away, the camera flashes flashed a few times. Joanna lived in a closed community with several exits. In addition, Eric paid attention to this kind of thing, so he was sure that the paparazzi did not follow them from the community where Joanna lived. There was only one possibility. The paparazzi not far away must be waiting here. Fox's headquarters should be frequented by celebrities, so it made sense for them to be waiting here. However, Eric still felt that it was too much of a coincidence. Pulling Connolly into the office building, Eric looked carefully at the woman's ignorant face. Soon, he almost figured out the ins and outs of the matter. This silly little vase was obviously being used. From some of the previous phone calls with Connolly, Eric already knew that Condor Anti was scheduled to be released on November 16th. It was less than 3 weeks from now. The trailer had already been released on a large scale. How could it still need dubbing? Condor Anti had 30% of Eric's investment. Fox had always wanted Eric to be a nominal producer, so that they could use his name to promote. Eric's continuous success in many films not only brought him huge profits, but also a good reputation among the audience. Now, when many fans heard that a film was related to him, they would have a strong interest in this film without too much promotion. Therefore, this kind of reputation could bring real benefits, just like the appeal of a star's box office. Chapter 384. However, Eric never agreed to Fox's request. The project was just a plaything he chose for Connolly. Other than the investment, he had not participated in any production process. Therefore, it was impossible for him to let Fox use his name for publicity. Now it seemed that Fox was obviously unwilling to give up and had other ideas. He was sure that there would be a scandal between him and Jennifer Connelly in tomorrow's newspaper. Coupled with the fact that Connelly was the heroine of The Condor Rebel, Fox would be able to link him to The Condor Rebel with a little twist. The two walked into the elevator. Connelly looked at Eric, who seemed to be deep in thought, and asked curiously, "Eric, what's wrong?" "Nothing." Eric shook his head and did not tell Connelly what he had found. The two walked out of the elevator and saw a few people waiting outside. In addition to Elizabeth, whom Eric knew, and Fox's distribution director, Calta Hunt, who had worked with them before, there was also a thin, middle-aged man with glasses. "Eric, long time no see." Calta Hunt greeted him warmly and hugged Eric. "You've gained some weight." Eric let go of Calta and teased him with a smile. Calta said helplessly, "I've been too busy with work recently. I get fat when I'm stressed." "Oh yes, Liz, you know him. And this is the director of Condor Rebel, Mr. Jim Abrahams." Eric and Elizabeth just greeted each other with their eyes, and then shook hands with Jim Abrahams. "Mr. Williams. Hello. I like your movie very much." Jim Abrahams was very enthusiastic. If it were not for Eric's recommendation, his movie would not have been shot so smoothly. "Hello, Mr. Abrahams. Your movie style is also very interesting." They stood in the corridor and chatted for a while. Abrahams then left with Connelly on the grounds of work. After the two left, Eric did not speak again. He stood in the same spot and looked at Carter and Elizabeth with a faint smile. Carter obviously had a guilty conscience. He wanted to pretend as if nothing had happened, but he did not dare to look Eric in the eye. Even Elizabeth could not help but hide half of her body behind Carter. After a moment of silence, Calta braced himself and said, "Eric, let's go take a look at the sample of Dances with Wolves. I've also invited a few film critics and other employees from the distribution department. They're all waiting in the screening room. We can discuss the distribution plan while we're at it. You're also in charge of the promotion of Condor Rebel, right?" Eric finally asked. Calta could not pretend anymore and nodded awkwardly. The idea of using the scandal between Eric and Connelly to promote Condor Rebel was proposed by one of his assistants. Calta thought it was a good idea, and he thought that Eric would not necessarily find out that they were behind it. Unexpectedly, before the little trick could be carried out, Eric had obviously found out. "Don't do it again," Eric said seriously. "And don't cross the line." Hearing that Eric did not ask him to stop and instead approved of the plan, Calta immediately nodded and said, "You can rest assured that the reporter is from the New York Post." The New York Post was a property of News Corporation. Eric nodded and said, "You go to the screening room first. I have some private matters to discuss with Liz." Calta glanced at Elizabeth and turned to walk to the screening room at the other end of the corridor. Elizabeth did not seem to hear Eric's words. She lowered her head and was about to leave with Calta, but Eric grabbed her by the collar and dragged her to the stairwell next to the elevator. Calta turned his head and looked at the girl struggling in Eric's hands. He smiled and shook his head, ignoring her. He thought to himself that this delicate girl finally had someone who could control her. He did not know the inside story behind Elizabeth's purchase of the copyright of Dances with Wolves, so he took Elizabeth's previous performance seriously. Pushing open the heavy iron door of the stairwell, the two walked in. Eric turned his hand and closed the iron door. After a bang, the corridor fell into darkness. Looking at the girl who was grabbing the door handle, ready to escape at any time, Eric cracked his fingers. Elizabeth's eyes flickered and she stuttered a warning, You, I'm warning you, don't mess around. This is my territory. I'll ask the security to kick you out in minutes. Eric looked up and down at the girl in denim, as if he was considering where to start. It feels good to scheme against your own man, doesn't it? Bah, who's your woman? I'm warning you, I've already changed your sexual orientation and became a lesbian? Elizabeth's eyes widened in surprise. It must be Drew who told you. That little traitor. I've always felt that she was unreliable. Yeah, Drew also said that you two are too unprofessional. She was very disappointed that you two didn't really become gay, so she told me as a joke. A joke? Elizabeth looked incredulous and retorted, she's talking nonsense. I've already decided to be with Julia forever. Ah, you're not allowed to come over. After some time, Eric said with a smile, look, you're such a failure as a lesbian. Not only do you not resist men, but you like them very much. Elizabeth, who was leaning against the staircase door, heard Eric's teasing. She lifted her leg and kicked him weakly. You bastard, I don't like it. Eric didn't care. He smiled and adjusted his collar. It's okay, if you don't like it this time, we'll continue next time. Let's go to the theater, they must be waiting anxiously. Elizabeth immediately shook her head, her face still hot. No, I'll definitely be seen through like this. How can I meet people like this? Then where do you plan to go? Eric asked casually. He reached out and pulled the door handle a few times, but the door didn't open. He could only take the girl to the next floor. TG's office is on the 3rd floor. I'll go there, Elizabeth replied. Then she realized that her attitude was wrong. The girl immediately pulled a long face. It's none of your business where I go. Then I don't care. Eric shook his head with a smile. He then teased, but I can't just let go of the fact that you helped Calta set me up. The 10 slaps on the leather drum won't run away sooner or later. I'll put that on record. Elizabeth glared fiercely at Eric. At this moment, the girl really wished that she had the laser eye ability from the manga. She could burn a big hole in this hateful guy's body with her gaze. Hearing Eric's words, Elizabeth remembered what happened not long ago. She said unhappily, Petty man, I haven't settled the score with you for hitting me in front of them last time. Eric didn't care at all about the girl's murderous glare. He narrowed his eyes and moved closer to the girl. He whispered, Don't worry, I'll definitely teach you a lesson in front of them next time. Elizabeth shrunk her neck. Although she knew that Eric would do what he said, she didn't want to back down. She gritted her teeth and said fiercely, If you dare to do that to me again, I swear, I'll fight it out with you. I'll be happy to oblige. I prefer the most primitive way of dueling. Besides, you women have more natural advantages. The two bickered as they walked down the stairs. The door to this floor was gently closed. Eric pulled it open and the two walked out. Elizabeth immediately grabbed an elevator and went down with a triumphant expression. Eric just shrugged. After a while, he took the elevator back to the floor they were on and walked to the screening room. Chapter 385. Dances with Wolves was 236 minutes long, nearly 4 hours long. It was definitely impossible to finish watching it in the morning. Eric, Fox's head of distribution, and several well-known film critics watched the first 2 hours together. After lunch, they finished watching the next 2 hours. Eric didn't watch this movie in his previous life. He only briefly read the published book when he was investigating. Now that he was watching this 4 hours long movie, Eric wasn't like the Fox's staff. When he watched the movie, he didn't subconsciously think about what kind of distribution strategy to use and where to promote the movie. Because he was fully immersed in the plot, Eric and the invited film critics watched with great interest. Traditional Western movies often promoted white supremacy and heroism. The plot was usually about white people resisting and conquering under the oppression of the local evil forces in the process of development. However, Dances with Wolves was the complete opposite. The protagonist of the movie, Lieutenant Dunbar, chose to commit suicide due to his disability and confusion about the war. After he was saved, he was treated as a hero by a freak combination of factors. The subversive and ironic setting at the beginning of the movie doomed the tone of the movie to be illogical. It foreshadowed First Lieutenant Dunbar's rebellious behavior of surrendering to the Native Americans at the end of the movie. After recovering from his injuries, Lieutenant Dunbar was sent to a remote outpost bordering the Native Americans' residential area. He thought he would live a peaceful life there. However, a few children from the nearby Sioux tribe had once stolen a horse, which connected First Lieutenant Dunbar to this Native American tribe. Then, Lieutenant Dunbar accidentally saved Standing Fist Dance and sent her back to the Sioux tribe. The two sides began to interact. After probing again and again, interaction and awkward communication, as time passed, the two sides finally established a sincere friendship. Lieutenant Dunbar also fell in love with Standing Fist Dance, a white woman who was stranded in the Sioux tribe. The director used a lot of details to describe this process, but these seemingly ordinary scenes didn't feel long at all. Instead, they often smiled because of the awkward interaction between the two sides due to the language barrier. After marrying Standing Fist Dance, First Lieutenant Dunbar was about to move to the Sioux tribe. When he returned to the outpost to collect his luggage, he found that there was another group of soldiers stationed there. After noticing the appearance of First Lieutenant Dunbar, who was dressed in Native American attire, the group of white soldiers shot at him indiscriminately. The proud and arrogant white soldiers did not care about First Lieutenant Dunbar's defense of the Sioux people. Instead, they treated him as a traitor and beat him up before escorting him to the nearby fortress for trial. During the process, the Sioux people killed this group of soldiers and rescued First Lieutenant Dunbar. Because he was disappointed in the brutality and arrogance of the white people, Lieutenant Dunbar completely changed his name to Dancing with Wolves, announcing his break with the white world. However, in order not to implicate the Sioux people, Lieutenant Dunbar had no choice but to leave the tribe with Fist Dance. Excellent movies all had one characteristic, which was that people would unknowingly finish watching it, even if it was 4 hours long. Even if the movie was only 90 minutes long, it would still give people the urge to leave early. The style of Dancing with Wolves was simple and fresh. The shots were simple and unpretentious. The details were rich and infectious. It made people unknowingly sink into it. No matter if it was the current or the future era of the internet, the Oscars were greatly influenced by film critics. If a movie that was highly praised by film critics didn't even get an Oscar nomination, then the credibility of the Oscars would definitely be questioned. Therefore, before the Oscar committee voted, they would often use the reputation of the nominated movie as an important basis. Therefore, if any movie wanted to compete for an Oscar, the first thing they had to do was public relations with the film critics. After the screening, almost all the invited film critics expressed high praise for the movie. After sending the group of people away, a few executives from Fox's distribution department held a short meeting. Only then did Calta start to discuss the details of the release of Dancing with Wolves with Eric. Although the film critics just gave a very high evaluation of the movie, the time is still the biggest weakness. Many theaters are not willing to show such a long movie. Therefore, we have roughly discussed two plans. One is to release it during Easter next year. This way, Fox can arrange for 1,500 screens. If the box office is good, we can increase it. Of course, this is definitely not in line with the distribution strategy of an Oscar film, but it can maximize the box office potential of the movie. Although the movie won Best Picture and Best Director in his memory, Eric really didn't know how the box office of the movie was. However, the Oscars were not niche yet. Looking back at the Best Picture Oscars of the past few years, such as Driving for Miss Daisy, Rain Man, and Platoon, all received very high box office in North America. Therefore, it was definitely not wrong for Dancing with Wolves to follow the typical distribution strategy of an Oscar film. At the very least, after winning Best Picture, they could earn more through the videotape revenue. If it was released during Easter next year, although they could get more canvases, when the Oscars came at the end of the year, even if Dancing with Wolves still had a strong reputation, its influence and publicity would definitely not be as good as those movies released at the end of the year. Even if they could still win an Oscar, they would definitely not be able to enjoy the box office rebound bonus after the Oscars. Therefore, Eric shook his head and said, "Calta, let's talk about the second plan." The second plan is to follow the strategy of an Oscar film and release it at the end of next year. But in this case, your investment will be delayed for another year. I heard that Liz spent $30 million to win this movie. As Calta spoke, he thought of Eric's current net worth. He smiled and shook his head. Well, you definitely don't care about this money. Then let's talk about the second plan. We'll release the movie at the end of next year, but we can't use Orion's original hairstyle strategy. They set the release date on the 9th of November, which felt like they were messing around. Orion Constellation's releases had always been messy. But it's understandable when you think about Orion's current situation. They have been losing money for the past few years, so they don't want to miss any opportunity to make a profit. However, they want to compete for the Oscars and don't want to give up 2 months of holiday tickets. This seems too greedy. Why don't they think about the fierce competition for the holiday slots? If this movie can't even last 2 months of holiday slots, how can they enjoy the box office bonus after the Oscars? Chapter 386. Last year, when he planned to buy a film company with distribution channels, Eric also collected information on Orion Pictures. This film company was established at the end of the 70s around the same time as Wayne Stan's Mira Mikes. But compared to Mira Mikes' small business, the establishment of Orion Pictures could be said to have great momentum. It attracted the cooperation of famous filmmakers such as Francis Coppola, Sylvester Stallone, and so on. Even the first Terminator movie was released by Orion Pictures. After Orion Pictures was established, it produced 18 movies in a short 5 years, and 10 of them were profitable. This ratio was definitely very high among film companies. Therefore, Orion Pictures was once named by the media as another Hollywood player that posed the most threat to several major film companies. It even caused a fight between Viacom's Sam Leishadong and Metropolis Media's John Krug. In the end, the wealthy John Krug took control of Orion Pictures with a huge sum of money. But starting from the late 80s, Orion Pictures' situation took a turn for the worse. Because of the losses they made for several years in a row, Orion Pictures became more and more in debt, and could face bankruptcy at any time. Okay, don't be sarcastic. I heard that John Krug already plans to sell Orion Pictures to oil tycoon Marvin Davis. That's a big financial backer. Maybe he will make a comeback. When did you see the news? Calta asked. Eric thought for a moment and said, about a week ago. It was an article in the Hollywood Reporter. Calta said, then you definitely don't know. This deal is already over. Marvin Davis lost a lot of money when he bought 20th Century Fox and had no choice but to sell it to Mr. Murdoch. How could he make the same mistake again? John Krug already plans to stop production of Orion Pictures. I heard that the company's production department is preparing to take the rights to the Addams Family TV series from Orion Pictures. Eric just shrugged. Who cares? Let's talk about our plan. As for the second plan, Calta nodded and was about to continue when he suddenly looked at Eric seriously and said, Eric, I suddenly understood something. Since the rights to Dances with Wolves are in your hands, Liz throwing a tantrum to take this movie should be under your instructions, right? Yes. Eric didn't deny it. Calta hesitated for a moment. Remembering Eric's foresight, he asked, then what do you think about the box office prospects of this movie? If you think it's good, we'll release it on Thanksgiving next year. If you just want this movie to make way for The Silence of the Lambs, then release it on Christmas? This is definitely a movie that has the potential to win the Oscar for Best Picture. That's all I can see. As for the box office, I really don't have any clue, but it shouldn't be too bad, Eric said honestly. In that case, Calta saw that Eric didn't have any confidence in the movie's box office prospects, so he said, then we'll release it in December according to the release strategy of Rain Man. But because it's a Christmas release, a movie company with this kind of theme can only provide 1,000 screens at most. But we'll definitely do a lot better than Orion Pictures. After spending a few hours discussing the details of the cooperation, Calta asked Eric when he was walking him out of the office building, Eric, although it's a bit strange to ask this question, I'm still curious. Since you've got the copyright of this movie, why don't you distribute it yourself? Eric said helplessly, do Do you think Liz will be willing to go crazy for no reason and get back the nickname of Princess Fox? This is the condition we discussed at the beginning. The rights are mine, and the distribution is Fox's. That chick is like a little hamster, trying to get everything into her nest. Calta laughed and said, "Of course. After all, she's the daughter of the Murdoch family." Jennifer Connelly left after finishing the so-called dubbing of Condor Rebel in the morning. Eric didn't go back to Joanna's villa directly because it wasn't time to get off work yet. Instead, he went to Burbank and dealt with some official business in the office before leaving at the end of the day. The next day, as expected, the New York Post published a scandal report about him and Jennifer Connelly. The article tactfully didn't use the photo of Connelly throwing herself into Eric's arms. Instead, it chose a photo of the girl intimately holding his arm as they walked into the Fox office building. In this case, if the two of them didn't want to admit it, they could insist that they were good friends. Good friends holding each other's arms wasn't a big deal, right? It was up to the reader to believe it or not. Except for the somewhat ambiguous title Williams Another Jennifer, the content of the article was quite restrained. It recounted the past of Eric and Jennifer Aniston, and described Jennifer Connelly's background as a child star in detail. As for the relationship between the two, the report used a completely speculative tone. After a few paragraphs of introduction, the news began to turn to Jennifer Connelly's recent role in Condor Rebel. In fact, most people would find that this was a publicity article. However, publicity articles mixed with scandals were the kind of subject matter that readers like to read. Even if many people could see at a glance that the news was not credible, it was still more eye-catching than those exaggerated movie reviews. Many movies would use this method when promoting, but most of them used scandals between the male and female leads. However, this time, Condor Rebel used the scandal between the female lead and the hot young director in Hollywood, Eric Williams. As for Charlie XIN, the male lead of The Fighting Condor Rebels, although he had participated in Platoon a few years ago and could barely be considered an A-list male star, his influence was still far from Eric's. Although Charlie Sheen was also a famous playboy in Hollywood, if the scandal between him and the female lead was used, it would definitely attract considerable attention. However, considering the relationship between Connelly and Eric, even if someone brought it up, the publisher would not risk angering Eric. After all, Eric's current identity was not just a director, not to mention that Jennifer Connelly would definitely not cooperate. Eric did not care too much about this report. However, after a few women saw it, they called one after another to test him. Since breaking up with Jennifer Aniston, Eric had not confirmed an official girlfriend. Of course, it was impossible for these women to not have any thoughts. However, Eric brushed them all off perfunctorily. He did not have such thoughts at all. Chapter 387. Eric thought that the scandal between him and Connelly would disappear after a while if he and Connelly did not actively respond, but he had far underestimated his influence and the curiosity of the media and the public about this matter. After the New York Post released the intimate photos of him and Connelly at the Fox headquarters, in just a few days, he and Connelly became the focus of a large number of paparazzi, and all kinds of groundless gossip appeared one after another in various tabloids. Of course, Fox was secretly happy. Although they did not dare to write too much in order to avoid falling out with Eric, they could not prevent other media from reporting on this matter. In the last 2 weeks before the release, Fox also completely focused on Jennifer Connelly in the publicity of Condor RUS. Because of the collateral effect of this scandal, the publicity effect of Condor RUS was not only much better than expected, but also saved a lot of publicity budget. In the face of a large number of paparazzi, Eric began to look forward to the arrival of the era of media monopoly while strengthening his own security. In this era, the media channels in the United States were quite scattered. There were almost more than 50 media companies of various platforms in the country, so the dissemination of information was quite free. But 10 years later, the media industry in the United States had undergone a large number of mergers and acquisitions, and more than 90% of the information transmission channels were in the hands of the 6 major media groups. At that time, as long as he had enough power in Hollywood, he did not even have to say anything about being harassed by paparazzi. Someone would solve the problem. Originally, Eric planned to stay with Joanna before she went back to Poland to visit her family, but because of the impact of this incident, and because he had more important things to do at the end of the year, he had to move to his own mansion in Beverly Hills under Joanna's complaints. In November, Eric began to make the final preparations for the expulsion of Robert Shea. In the first few weeks of November, he held several parties in a row in the Beverly Hills mansion and invited all levels of management and employees of Firefly to get to know each other. At the same time, Eric also had several private conversations with Robert Shea's deputy, Michael Lynn. After supervising Instinct in the first half of the year, Jeffrey planned to rest on his farm in Maryland for half a year. He would start working again when Eric's tornado project started next year. However, after learning about Eric's plan, Jeffrey hurried back to Los Angeles, intending to assist him in stabilizing Firefly's situation after Eric made his move. Jeffrey didn't have any relatives in Los Angeles. His flight from Maryland on the East Coast to Los Angeles arrived at 7:30 p.m. On November 13th, Eric personally went to the airport to greet him. In the arrival hall, Jeffrey appeared in front of Eric with a small suitcase. He hugged Eric warmly and handed the suitcase to the bodyguard who came with Eric. The two walked out side by side. "It's really sad to see you so lonely. Jeffrey, maybe you should find another companion." "I don't have such thoughts. Chris won't accept it either." Jeffrey shook his head and quickly said with a smile, "But you've been quite popular in the newspapers these days." "Another Jennifer. Hee hee. It's a plan made by Fox to promote Anti-Condor. I didn't think it was a big deal, so I acquiesced. I didn't expect it to have such a big impact." Jeffrey said again, "But I think this girl is not as smart as Jennifer Aniston. She's too delicate." Although Jennifer Aniston liked to throw a tantrum in front of him, it was also a girl's character in front of her lover. However, this girl was much more likable than Drew. Although they only met a few times, Jennifer Aniston was deeply liked by Jeffrey. Eric couldn't help but sigh. Jennifer Aniston's agency contract was still with Kapoor, so Eric could get the latest news of this girl at any time. Since they broke up at the beginning of the year, Jennifer Aniston seemed to have become a career-type woman. She devoted herself to acting. More than half of the second season of Friends was now broadcast. The average viewership of more than 20 million was still outstanding. In addition, Jennifer Aniston also took on 2 movies. One was a cameo that only had a 5-minute appearance. It was released during the summer and the results were not bad. The other was a romantic comedy. It was released on Christmas Day. Eric happened to see the trailer on TV once. It was produced by Warner and cooperated with Matt Dillon. It was a movie that he had no impression of at all. It should be the result of the butterfly effect. Because of the influence of Pretty Woman, which appeared in advance and was a great success last year, Hollywood had a lot of romantic comedies this year. It was estimated that after Ghost, the proportion of such movies would definitely increase in the next 2 years. Unfortunately, although Eric had been silently paying attention to Jennifer Aniston, he believed that this girl was also paying attention to him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have received the anonymous gift on his birthday this year. However, the two hadn't seen each other for almost a year. Jeffrey just subconsciously compared Jennifer Aniston with Connolly. Noticing Eric's depressed mood, he didn't continue. The paparazzi who followed all the way to the airport had already raised their cameras, but when they saw that it was Jeffrey who came out with Eric, they just pressed the shutter a few times. Some of them even didn't want to waste the film and directly put down the camera. Facing the 4 or 5 bodyguards around Eric and Jeffrey, these paparazzi didn't dare to approach. After escorting Eric and Jeffrey to the car, except for the driver, the remaining 4 bodyguards rushed to the black Chevrolet behind. "Isn't this too cautious?" After the car started, Jeffrey couldn't help but ask. "It's mainly to prevent the paparazzi behind us. If I'm surrounded by them, I won't be able to get away," Eric pointed to the back of the car and said. But in September, a director of Warner was kidnapped when he was on vacation in Greece. Not only was he blackmailed for $1 million, but he almost didn't come back alive. "It's never wrong to be careful. I'm now a high-risk kidnapper. What's more serious is that I don't have any relatives. If I'm kidnapped, I can't even find a ransom person. Jeffrey couldn't help but laugh. How is that possible? We won't ignore it. Eric joked. The key is that the kidnappers don't necessarily know this. Maybe after they kidnapped me, they suddenly found that there were no relatives they could contact, and they killed me directly. In that case, I think you should get married early. I don't have such plans. Eric shook his head. Jeffrey knew Eric's temperament. The two people's views on life were very different. He knew that it was useless to say anything else. The two chatted casually until they arrived at Jeffrey's apartment. After getting out of the car, Eric walked in with Jeffrey. I asked someone to help you clean up this morning, but I didn't buy anything to eat. You can go to the supermarket tomorrow by yourself. It's best to hire a servant. I don't need any servant. I'm not even 60 years old yet. It's not like I can't move. Jeffrey said and waved his hand to let Eric sit down on the sofa. He then boiled water and made coffee. After a while, Jeffrey handed a cup of coffee to Eric and sat down on the other side of the sofa. Because there were outsiders in the car, Jeffrey couldn't say anything. Now, he asked solemnly, Eric, isn't this a little too hasty? Eric knew that Jeffrey was referring to the expulsion of Robert Shea. He shook his head. If Robert has the ability to make Firefly develop quickly, even if he wants enough power, I can give it to him. But his ability is limited, and he has no restraint in his pursuit of the company's power. He has always been calculating in his heart. This kind of person is destined to do no good to Firefly's development. Jeffrey said again, but what about the 25% shares in his hands? This is also what I'm most worried about. I have enough confidence in Firefly's development prospects. As Firefly develops and grows, if we do nothing, then in a few years, the conflict between me and Robert will be brought to the table. Coupled with Robert's identity as a shareholder, the conflict between the two of us will have a greater impact on the company. So, it's better to kick him out early. It seems that you've thought about it carefully. After Robert leaves, who do you plan to let at the helm? Michael Lynn, Robert's current deputy. I've talked to him several times and promised him some benefits. But I won't give him too much power. If a company wants to develop quickly, only one voice is necessary, just like Disney. And Time Warner is a negative example. Although Time Warner merged with Time Warner to become the largest Hollywood giant, the personnel disputes in Time Warner have become more complicated and even affect Warner's operations. Even if it has the largest scale in Hollywood, it will definitely be surpassed in the future. 3 days after Jeffrey returned to Los Angeles, on Friday, November 16th, MGM's Rocky V, Fox's Condor Rebel, and Robert Shea's thriller comedy Ghost Detective, which was a parody of Ghostbusters, were released at the same time, announcing the official arrival of the Thanksgiving period. In addition to these films, there would be Coppola's The Godfather 3, Schwarzenegger's Kindergarten SWAT, and the sequel to 1987's box office champion Three Stay-at-Home Fathers, and a Baby. Catherine Bigelow's Thriller was also scheduled to be released on December 21st. It was worth mentioning that during this holiday period in the original Spacetime, The Kid should have dominated the box office rankings for 10 weeks, squeezing other movies to the ground. But because The Kid appeared 2 years in advance, it meant that the 200 million yuan box office that originally belonged to The Kid would be shared with other movies. Chapter 388. In order to invite Eric to attend the premiere of Anti-Condor, Fox purposely moved the premiere to the day before Ghost Detective. However, Eric did not plan to attend the premiere of Ghost Detective. No matter how sincere Fox was, there was no way he would attend the premiere of Anti-Condor. Previously, they had already done him a favor by using his fame in a roundabout way to promote the movie. As the movie that MGM United Artists had high hopes for and had a production cost of up to 60 million yuan, Rocky V had the most screenings out of the 3 movies. However, when the box office of the first weekend was released, the results surprised many people. The most promising movie, Rocky V, turned out to be the one with the worst results. The previous sequel of the series had grossed $300 million worldwide, so Rocky V had a total of 2,000 screenings. However, in the first 3 days, Rocky V only earned $14.35 million at the box office, averaging less than $7,000 per screen. One had to know that the previous sequel, Rocky IV, had an average of $15,000 per screen during the same period. Not only was the attendance extremely low, but Rocky V's reputation was also extremely poor. The box office statistics agency directly lowered the box office forecast of the movie to $50 million. There was no possibility of recouping the cost. The media also predicted that this movie would be the end of the Rocky series. Meanwhile, Ghost Detective, which was released in more than 1,900 theaters, was only slightly better than Rocky V, earning more than $15 million at the box office. However, this thriller comedy that was a parody of Ghostbusters did not garner much praise either. In comparison, the most surprising one was Fox's Condor Anti. This movie, which could almost be said to be a mess, received extremely low reviews from the filmmakers. Many excited conservative film critics even regarded this movie as a blasphemy to classic films. But unexpectedly, this very novel parody film was very popular with a large number of audiences. In the first 3 days, the movie earned 25 million yuan at the box office in more than 1,900 theaters. This figure was just the same as the cost of the movie. If the movie did not drop too much in the future, it might even become another Fox movie this year that broke the 100 million yuan box office. So far, only Fox's Die Hard 2 had earned 110 million at the box office this year. However, the production cost of Die Hard 2 was $70 million, and the marketing cost was close to $100 million. Even if the overseas box office was good, Die Hard 2 didn't make much money. Although Eric had invested 30% in Condor R, Fox would still get the majority of the profits. Coupled with the overseas distribution and subsequent videotapes, this parody movie would easily bring in more than $100 million in profits. Therefore, after the box office was released, Fox immediately announced plans for a sequel. While Fox was ecstatic, their Hollywood counterparts had mixed feelings. Originally, the box office of Ghost Detective was not ideal. They thought that this would be Eric's first Waterloo. However, the results of Anti-Fighting Condor shocked everyone. After a detailed investigation, someone quickly found out that most of the investment for Ghost Detective came from a production company called Good Line Films. Good Line Films. When people heard the name, they seemed to understand something. Then, they thought about the Black Ant Film Company that Eric suddenly established in the first half of the year. They realized that there was probably a problem within Firefly. However, Eric did not have time to care about the movie these days. On the eve of Thanksgiving, after the 600,000 troops of the multinational coalition in the Middle East were all deployed, they quickly issued an ultimatum to Saddam, asking him to withdraw from Iraq before January 15, 1991. However, Saddam immediately gave the United Nations an extremely tough response, saying that he would fight to the end. After the news was leaked, the crude oil futures market began a new round of turmoil. In his memory, the Gulf War broke out on January 17, 2 days after the ultimatum was issued. Eric believed that even if his little butterfly instigated something, the timing would not be too far off. In order not to attract too much attention, Eric did not fly to New York this time. Instead, Chris came to Los Angeles. Just like last time, most people did not think that Iraq would attack Kuwait. This time, speculators were still inclined to think that after the war broke out, it would be as long as the previous 2 wars in the United States. Once this happened, the price of crude oil would soar again. Therefore, after the ultimatum was issued, speculators began to establish a large number of multiple positions. In the face of Eric's unusual pessimism, Chris did not question too much this time. However, the situation this time was very different from before August. Before August, the price of crude oil had been rising slowly. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, it suddenly soared to a high of $40. But now, in the face of the imminent war, the crude oil futures market would become even more unpredictable. There were still 2 months before the war broke out. During this time, whether it was the Western countries or Saddam Hussein, any information released could lead to a sharp rise or a sharp fall in the price of crude oil. Using the original 10 times leverage was tantamount to courting death. After discussion, The two unanimously decided to use $2 billion to use the safer 5 times leverage, and the remaining funds would be used as reserve deposits. On the one hand, this could minimize the risk to the maximum. On the other hand, Eric wanted to invest all of his funds, but the scale of the futures market was so big that $10 billion was the limit of 5 times leverage. If billions of dollars were invested with high leverage, it would be impossible to find a bank that could guarantee tens of billions of dollars. Chris stayed in Los Angeles for 2 days and soon left. Eric put all his focus on the most important thing. Even when he was celebrating Thanksgiving with Drew, Eric did not stop to make related arrangements. Although there was only one day of Thanksgiving Day in federal law, companies would usually have a holiday from the Thursday of Thanksgiving Day until Monday of the following week. Firefly Pictures was no exception. The 1990 Thanksgiving Day was on November 22nd. November 26th. Monday. Because of the release of several new films on November 22nd and 23rd, the box office of Rocky V fell by as much as 55% in the second weekend, earning less than $7 million. Ghost Detective's box office also fell by nearly 50%. This $40 million investment film was likely to lose money. However, Condor Rebel, under the attack of several new films, still managed to earn $16 million in the box office in the last 3 days of the second week. The total box office had reached more than $47 million. That day happened to be Firefly's end-of-year meeting. When Robert Shea arrived at the company early in the morning, he was keenly aware that the atmosphere in the company was not right. He thought that everyone was mocking his Ghost Detective's box office failure, so he found an excuse to throw a tantrum at an employee. At 9 o'clock, the meeting officially began. Chapter 389. Taking the memo from Alan, the two walked to the conference room together. Eric asked in a low voice, "How's that?" Alan also lowered his voice. "It's all done. The candidates for the director, Rennie Harlin, and the heroine, Gina Davis, have been revealed to Bruce Evans. However, we have also successfully made him realize that someone is very interested in the script of Throat Cutter Island. He is not in a hurry to make a move now. He is in a stalemate with the staff we sent. Moreover, some other people have begun to inquire about the script of Throat Cutter Island. They should be Robert's people." Eric nodded with relief, pushed open the door of the conference room, and the two walked in together. The main topic of today's meeting was the summary of Firefly's work for the past year. Since the beginning of the year, Firefly had only produced 2 films, Ghost and Sleeping with the Enemy. However, their results in film distribution were very dazzling. Ghost, Sleeping with the Enemy, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and The Silence of the Lambs had all achieved box office sales of more than 100 million. In addition, Firefly had also acted as an agent for the distribution of several small films from second- and third-tier production companies during the off-season, which also brought in a small amount of profit. Although the holiday season at the end of the year had just begun, the total box office in North America in 1990 had exceeded $5 billion. However, the total box office achieved by Firefly this year was only a little more than $600 million, accounting for 12% of the local box office. Although this figure was much worse than the box office results achieved by Eric's movies last year, if one thought about it carefully, one would find the difference. This year's results were achieved by Firefly's independent distribution. Last year, almost all of Eric's movies were distributed by the Big Seven. Even if the movie itself was very profitable, it was just a simple production company. After a year of integration with a new line, Firefly already had the embryonic form of a major film studio with a complete production and distribution channel, just like the Big Seven. Although there was still a gap between them and the Big Seven in terms of foundation, their box office share had already surpassed Paramount Pictures by 10%. As for MGM, it was far behind and ranked 6th among all the film companies in Hollywood. In terms of television production, Friends, produced by Firefly, was still at the top of the viewership ratings for the fall season, and the variety show, Who Will Become a Millionaire, was widely praised. The X-Files, which was broadcast at the same time as Friends in September, also received an average of 17 million viewers. Although this result was much worse than Friends, the main audience of The X-Files was mainly teenagers between 16 and 30 years old. It was not an all-ages comedy like Friends, so this result was also very good. What's more, because the viewing age group was very concentrated, The X-Files was even more popular with advertisers. Its advertising revenue was more than 20% higher than television series with similar viewership ratings. In addition, the company had also made significant progress in the videotape and overseas distribution business. The videotape distribution department had already established a partnership with the videotape rental giant, Blockbuster. Through the overseas distribution of Ghost and a few other movies, Firefly had also established its own branch companies in the UK, France, Australia, and other major countries. The expansion of the business also meant a large amount of investment. Therefore, Firefly's net profit for the first 3 quarters was only a little over $160 million. After Carolyn Elliott finished the financial report, Eric immediately announced a dividend plan for all employees of Firefly, which totaled up to $20 million. Amidst the low cheers, only Robert Shea frowned slightly. Robert knew about this dividend plan beforehand. After the plan was proposed, Robert Shea expressed his opposition. However, Eric used his power as the chairman to approve the plan. When he heard Eric announce it again, Robert Shea was still very unhappy. He felt that Eric was being too generous. After all, if he took out $20 million, it meant that his dividend would be reduced by $5 million. In order to make Ghost Detective, Robert Shea used his own assets to raise $30 million. Now that the movie was a failure, he had to use his year-end dividend to pay off the debt. Therefore, $5 million was a huge loss for Robert Shea. While he was thinking about this, Robert suddenly heard Eric continue, "Now, let's move on to the next topic. It's about removing Mr. Robert Shea from his position as the CEO of Firefly." For a moment, Robert Shea almost thought that he had misheard. However, when he saw the strange silence in the conference room and the strange looks that all the executives were giving him, Robert Shea first felt a chill down his spine, followed by extreme anger. He stood up abruptly, pointed at Eric and roared, "Eric Williams, do you know what you're doing?" Eric did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at the others in the conference room and said, "You guys can leave first. I want to talk to Robert alone." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone in the conference room, including Robert Shea's direct subordinates, all stood up quietly and walked out of the office. Robert Shea waved his arms excitedly and sneered, "I don't need to talk to you alone. There's nothing that can't be heard by others. Hey, Michael, Hardy, Linus, you guys stay here." Michael Lynn and a few other subordinates who were called out by Robert Shea stopped in their tracks. They looked at Eric and Robert. Michael Lynn sighed and said, "Robert, you talk to Eric properly." After that, they walked out of the office without stopping. Robert Shea saw the reactions of his direct subordinates and instantly realized that Eric had already planned for this. This made him frustrated and angry that he had been fooled. If Eric was not a tall and strong young man, Robert Shea would have pounced on him and punched him. However, he still roared, "I'm telling you, you won't succeed. You'll pay the price. I'm a shareholder of Firefly. I own 1/4 of the shares, so if you want to drive me away, don't even think about it." After Robert Shea paused for a moment, Eric interjected, "Regarding Firefly's shares, I'll buy them back at a reasonable price. I won't let you suffer a loss. In addition, I'll also pay you in full this year's profit share." Chapter 390. Robert Shea sneered. Do you think I'll sell it to you just because you want to take it back? Let me tell you, you're dreaming. That's impossible. Since you want to burn the bridge after crossing the river, I'll drag you down with me. Don't think that you can control everything in Firefly just because you've roped in Michael and the others." Eric stood up and stared coldly at Robert Shea across the desk. He was half a head taller than Robert Shea, and he had a steady temperament that was completely different from his peers. That calmed the crazy Robert Shea down a little. "It's fine if you don't want to sell it, but starting next year, I'll integrate Firefly, Pixar, Digital Domain, and Black Ant Films under me. At the same time, I'll bring in a large amount of funds for the construction of the studio in Praia Vista. I guarantee that your shares will be diluted to less than 10% and will continue to be diluted. Robert Shea, who had calmed down a little, couldn't help but ask, "Why are you doing this? Is it because I didn't follow your train of thought and give up on production and focus on distribution? Because you're not on the same side as Firefly. You're more concerned about your own power and interests. For that, you're even willing to sacrifice Firefly, the overseas distribution of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, the completely unnecessary budget for Sleeping with the Enemy, and the movie that's currently screening. Do you need me to give you more examples? Didn't you do the same? You were the one who established Black Ant Films first. Black Ant Film Company is completely my personal property. The distribution of Instinct did not use Firefly's channels at all. The distribution contract for Thriller Point is also more inclined towards Firefly, but you're always thinking of occupying Firefly's channels for your own benefits." After saying a few words, Eric waved his hand and said, "All right, Robert, that's enough. I don't want to debate who's right and who's wrong with you. If you leave now, you can make a comeback with a huge sum of money. From today onwards, Firefly will only have one voice." Robert Shea was once again infuriated by Eric. "I'll let you know that it's not that easy to get rid of me. I'll sue you. I'll get everything back from the new line." "You can sue. After 2 or 3 years, you will find that not only do you have to pay a sky-high lawyer fee, but your shares will also depreciate significantly, and you will completely leave Hollywood. Of course, even if it depreciates, you can still enjoy a comfortable life and retire early for the rest of your life." Robert Shea's temples throbbed a few times as anger surged in his heart. He casually picked up the coffee cup beside him. Faced with Eric's cold gaze, Robert Shea paused for a moment before throwing the coffee cup out. It smashed into a 32-inch television in the conference room that was used for video presentations. With a muffled bang, a puff of green smoke emerged from the shattered display screen. Eric glanced at the shattered television and said, "I'll get the finance department to record it and deduct it from your dividends. Don't worry, it will be calculated at the depreciated price." Robert Shea gritted his teeth and looked at Eric. He squeezed out some vague syllables from his mouth and kicked the chair beside him before he turned and left the conference room. According to the information we received, Firefly's total profit this year may only be ranked 4th behind Warner, Fox, and Worldwide. Under such a good development situation, Eric Williams' sudden and forceful dismissal of Robert Shea caused turmoil in Firefly. This is a very unwise move. The distribution channel that Firefly has just established is likely to be destroyed because of this. An unnamed employee within Firefly revealed that Eric Williams and Robert Shea had a fierce argument at the annual meeting. Then Eric Williams dismissed Robert Shea in a fit of rage. However, Robert Shea's representative later revealed that this wasn't the case. Eric Williams had unreasonably removed Robert Shea from his position without any reason. As for what the truth is, this newspaper will continue to follow up. Firefly said that the company's next film, Point Shock, will be released as usual and will not be affected by the sudden resignation of the CEO. Robert Shea looked agitated in an interview with The Hollywood Reporter. He condemned Eric Williams for kicking him to the curb and vowed to go to court with Eric Williams. It is reported that after Robert Shea's resignation, no new employees left Firefly with him. All the positions belonging to Robert Shea were quickly taken over by Eric Williams himself and the new CEO, Michael Lynn. Jeffrey Hansen was once again appointed as the president of Firefly. After a week of buffer, Firefly announced on the morning of December 2nd that it had launched negotiations with Robert Shea to repurchase his shares. Robert Shea seems to have given up on his decision to sue Firefly, but the matter is far from over. Although Firefly has the right to repurchase the shares in Robert Shea's hands, the 7 major Hollywood film companies have expressed their intention to acquire the shares. Because of Firefly's excellent results in television, the parent companies of the 3 major television stations, ABC, NBC, and CBS, have also made offers to Robert Shea. Then, several major media groups such as Viacom have also made offers. This morning, Robert Shea officially offered a price of $500 million. Based on this, the market value of Firefly has reached $2 billion. However, Firefly's spokesperson said that Robert Shea's price was completely outrageous. According to the data, Firefly Films only has a few properties such as the headquarters in Burbank. The studio base in Praia Vista is completely in the preparation stage. Therefore, Firefly's main asset is a series of film rights after the merger between Firefly and New Line. The number of films that have grossed over $100 million in box office in the past 2 years and have the potential for sequels is even more amazing. The sitcom Friends, which is fully copyrighted, has brought Firefly hundreds of millions of US in net profit through advertising, video distribution, and the sale of broadcast rights. Therefore, although the valuation of $2 billion is too high, it is not too exaggerated. While we are still talking about the stories of Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, and others who became billionaires at the age of 30, unknowingly, in Hollywood, which is always creating miracles, a 20-year-old billionaire has been born. Let's take a look back at the rise of this young billionaire. In the short week after Robert Shea's departure, the discussion about this matter was like a year-end carnival for all the media. Even the European media on the other side of the Atlantic joined in. Compared to the sensation caused by the figure of $2 billion, the scandal between Eric and Connolly some time ago was insignificant. Chapter 391. If it weren't for the war in the Middle East, Eric would have replaced George Bush as Time magazine's Man of the Year for that year. However, Time magazine also sent an invitation to Eric, hoping that he could appear on the cover of the first issue of Time magazine next year and have a detailed interview. Eric, who was extremely busy, directly rejected the other party. Due to the introverted nature of an Eastern man, he still felt that it was better to stay out of the limelight as much as possible, even though he was already in the limelight. After many famous media outlets' requests for exclusive interviews were rejected, the unwilling media once again used the dogskin plaster offensive. A large group of paparazzi squatted around Eric all day long, hoping to get any useful news. The mansion in Beverly Hills was no longer enough to stop their enthusiasm, and Eric had no choice but to move back to the Malibu Sharp Point Manor, where the security was tighter. After Robert Shea was dismissed from his position, he also tried to destroy Firefly's distribution channels through his own connections. However, Eric quickly took action on the day Robert Shea left. With the help of Michael Lynn, he reconnected the relevant distribution channels that were originally in Robert Shea's hands. Although they did not have direct contact with Eric, those movie theater companies and video distributors would not go against their interests. Therefore, although they encountered some small obstacles, all of Firefly's business returned to normal after a week. Then, I hope we can have a pleasant cooperation, Mr. Cades. After lunch at a famous restaurant on Sunset Boulevard, Eric finally shook hands with the fat middle-aged man in front of him. The other party was an executive of the AMC Theater Company. These days, Eric spent most of his time building relationships with people like this. Cohen Cades also shook hands with Eric with a smile. That's for sure. I believe we will have a pleasant cooperation in the future, Mr. Williams. The two people chatted casually and walked out of the restaurant side by side. The reporters squatting outside the restaurant quickly surrounded them. Although they were quickly separated by the bodyguards brought by Eric, they still crazily pressed their shutters and loudly asked Eric questions. Eric originally wanted to walk to the parking lot as quickly as possible, but the middle-aged fatty, Cohen Cassius, seemed to enjoy this feeling very much. He even posed in what he thought was a dashing pose under the flashing lights. Seeing this, Eric only smiled and gestured to the bodyguards, telling them not to rush to push the reporters away so that the fat man beside him could enjoy the attention for a while longer. Noticing the brief pause between the two, the paparazzi's questions became louder, but Eric remained silent. Instead, it was Cohen Cades who enthusiastically answered a few questions. A few minutes later, after sending Cohen Cades off, Eric got into his car and found Aaron waiting for him in the car. Before the driver started the car, Aaron said with a little excitement, "Eric, the fish took the bait." Eric raised the baffle in front of him and separated the driver and bodyguards in the front row before asking, "When?" "Just yesterday afternoon, but I just learned about it." The person in charge of contacting Bruce Evans brought back the news that Bruce Evans has sold the script of Throat Cut Island. They didn't find out the specific price, but the buyer must be Robert Shea. Let those people do a few more scenes and then stop, Eric said, leaning back in his chair. Robert Shea getting the script of Throat Cut Island may bring some turnaround in the negotiations between the two sides. Although Robert Shea left Firefly and lost his new line, with his character, he would definitely not leave Hollywood so easily. He would definitely seek a comeback. After getting the script of Throat Cut Island, Robert Shea would definitely be eager to produce this script that Eric valued, so that he could once again make his reputation in Hollywood. Eric's previous budget for Throat Cut Island was at least $70 million, and in his memory, it was $90 million US. So, if Robert Shea wanted to produce this movie, he must get a huge amount of money in a short period of time, so he definitely didn't want to delay the negotiation with Firefly for too long. Find a way to get someone to release this news, Eric thought for a moment and said to Aaron, but he quickly shook his head again. Forget it, don't complicate matters. Robert definitely can't handle a big investment movie like Throat Cut Island now. He will seek cooperation himself. After Eric finished speaking, he thought of Disney. Since Robert Shea and Michael Eisner were so close, Disney must be Robert Shea's first cooperation partner. From the Ghost incident, Michael Eisner would probably offer a good price to rope in this project again. However, some things were always beyond Eric's expectations. While negotiating with Robert Shea, Eric did not expect that Robert Shea would take the initiative to release the news that he got the Throat Cut Island project. Firefly did not give up the preemptive right to repurchase. For the shares in Robert Shea's hands, the Big Seven could only watch helplessly. But after hearing about the Throat Cut Island project, the Big Seven realized almost at the same time that this movie was likely to be another Ghost after a detailed investigation, so they all pounced on it like wolves in the winter. Back then, many company executives regretted losing this huge gold mine because they didn't have sufficient expectations for Ghost. If they could realize that this was a movie script with a box office of $200 million in North America, even if they offered $10 million, it would definitely be worth it. After all, there might not even be one or two movies in North America that could reach $200 million in box office sales every year. This box office figure also meant that the overseas box office and video-related earnings would be equivalent to the total profits of the Big Seven in a year. A black helicopter slowly landed on the tarmac of the Shop Corner Manor with a roar. The paparazzi guarding the gate of the manor could only stare at the winged object. However, the security personnel in the manor quickly surrounded the tarmac. Many of them even took out their pistols because this black helicopter was not owned by the manor's own helicopter team, and they had not received any news of a visit before. Why, Lisabeth jumped down from the helicopter with the help of the pilot. She straightened her denim outfit, raised her chin slightly, and glared at the 5 or 6 security personnel surrounding her. What are you doing? Chapter 392. As the head of the manor's bodyguards, Carter Moan, who often followed Eric, knew the relationship between Eric and Lisabeth. He motioned for the others to put away their weapons before politely saying to Lisabeth, "Miss Murdoch, we didn't receive any news that you were coming over, so we thought you were an intruder." Lisabeth did come over rashly. Because there were many paparazzi outside the manor, she had to find a helicopter to come over in order not to be a hot topic for gossip tabloids. But of course, Lisabeth wouldn't say much in front of these people. She just asked, "Where's Eric?" Carter Moan's expression suddenly became a little strange because there was already a woman in the manor. He knew that Eric had a habit of not inviting other women over when there was a woman in the manor. So, it was obvious that the young lady in front of him came uninvited. But these were all things for the male owner to worry about, so he just said, "Mr. Williams is in the villa. Do you want me to inform him?" "No, I'll go by myself," Lisabeth said and walked straight to Freedom City on the edge of the cliff. When she came to the gate, Lisabeth reached out and pushed the door. She found that the heavy single-sided glass door was locked. She leaned against the door and looked inside. Of course, she couldn't see anything. She was about to ring the doorbell when she saw the password lock keyboard next to her. Lisabeth rolled her eyes and had a mischievous idea. She took out the Motorola mobile phone and skillfully dialed Drew's number. Soon, She got the security password. After entering the password, she pushed the door open and walked in. Why Elizabeth deliberately took off her small leather boots and put them aside. She stepped silently on the smooth floor of the hall with thin socks. Through the hall, why Elizabeth soon saw Eric's figure. Several sets of sofas, space chairs and other furniture were placed by the huge glass window near the sea. Eric was sitting on a single sofa on the far west side, his head lowered as he carefully drew something on the drawing board on his lap. Why Elizabeth, who wanted to sneak up behind Eric to scare him, suddenly widened her eyes because a woman was lying on her side on the sofa opposite Eric. It was Jennifer Connolly, but what surprised why Elizabeth was Connolly's outfit. "Don't move." Eric raised his head in dissatisfaction. Connolly paused, and Eric also noticed that the girl's gaze was focused behind him. He turned around and saw that it was Elizabeth, so he said, "Don't worry about her. Lie down obediently. I'm almost done." In any case, the other party was just a woman. Coupled with Eric's insistence, Connolly lay back down obediently. However, his face became rosy and tender. Noticing that why Elizabeth was sizing up his figure with jealousy, Connolly, who was originally a little tense, quickly relaxed, and a smile appeared on his face. Elizabeth snorted and walked over to sit on the armrest of Eric's armchair. She looked at the sketch on Eric's knee that was almost completed and mocked, "Is this the private life of a billionaire?" "Shut up," Eric said without raising his head. Obviously, he was very dissatisfied with Elizabeth's interruption. He still held the charcoal pencil in his hand and continued to draw seriously. Elizabeth raised her small fist and circled above Eric with her white teeth. In the end, she didn't dare to land on Eric. She awkwardly retracted her fist. Elizabeth got up and walked to the small round table next to her to pour herself a cup of coffee. She sat on the other armchair with the cup in her hand and looked at Eric, who was drawing. Although she didn't want to admit it, Lu Zhou's temperament when he pursed his lips and drew seriously was indeed very attractive. For a moment, Elizabeth even hoped that the woman lying on the sofa would be her. As soon as this thought popped up in her mind, she silently spat twice. After more than 10 minutes, Eric raised his head and said, "Baby, you can get up now." Connolly spread out the thin blanket and put it on her body. She smiled and came over. She looked at Eric's completed sketch and praised, "That's amazing. Is this really me?" "Of course, only a little beauty like you can draw such an effect," Eric said with a smile as he put the charcoal pencil aside and took out a wet wipe to wipe his hands. Elizabeth, who came over curiously, looked at the lifelike girl on the drawing board. Although she agreed with Connolly's words in her heart, she was not convinced and said, "It's just I can draw too." Eric patted Connolly's waist that was wrapped in a thin blanket and said, "Baby, go and put on your clothes. Give me some time to get rid of this unpleasant guest." Connolly smiled and glanced at Elizabeth. She knew Elizabeth's identity, so she didn't show too much pride. She obediently got up and left. After Connolly went up the stairs nearby to the second floor, Eric arranged the portfolio in front of him and asked, "Tell me, what's the matter?" Looking at this aggressive look, "I guess you must be itching for a beating and want me to teach you a lesson?" Elizabeth snorted twice and was about to retort, but she remembered her father's instructions, so she softened her tone. "Eric, can you give Robert Shea's shares to Fox? My father said that if we get the shares, we will never participate in any decisions of Firefly. You still have absolute control of Firefly. This promise can be written in the agreement." The moment Elizabeth appeared, Eric expected the little girl's purpose today. The most nervous about the 25% shares in Robert Shea's hands, besides Firefly itself, was undoubtedly Fox. It would be better if other film companies took it. If the shares fell into the hands of the 3 major TV stations, it would undoubtedly pose a threat to the cooperation between Firefly and Fox. Even if the possibility of Friends being taken away was not high, there was a high chance that Firefly would develop new shows and put them on the 3 major TV stations to compete with Fox. This was definitely not what Murdoch wanted to see. Moreover, once interests were involved, personal friendship basically did not play much of a role. After all, Any company had a large group of employees to feed. Eric could not completely ignore the efforts of the management in pursuit of the greatest interests. Therefore, if the shares were not taken or the shares were taken by competitors, then naturally, the management of Firefly would be biased towards the competitors. He gestured to the coffee on the small round table. Elizabeth wrinkled her nose in dissatisfaction and reluctantly poured a cup of coffee for Eric. Chapter 393. Eric took 2 sips of the warm coffee and said, "I definitely can't give you the shares. A year ago, I only paid $150 million for the acquisition of the new line. Now, Robert Shea is offering me $500 million. I don't want this to happen again." Elizabeth analyzed clearly, "You're just trying to fool a layman. $500 million is impossible. Even if you do fork out $500 million, you're still getting a great deal. A year ago, Firefly was like a cripple with only one leg. Even if it had the copyrights to a few popular movies, it had no distribution channels at all. At most, it was worth $500 to $600 million US, and its distribution channels could be cut off at any time and it would fall into a desperate situation. But after the integration of the new line, Firefly only took a year to develop into a junior major film studio. Although the valuation of $2 billion is a bit exaggerated, $1.5 billion is definitely still there. That means your net worth has increased by $1 billion in a year. Without the new line, with the constraints of the Big Seven, you might not be able to achieve this even if you use 10 years. Eric listened to Elizabeth's analysis and nodded. "Well, your analysis is very reasonable. You can write a paper when you go back. I've already graduated, and I got straight A's." Elizabeth raised her chin and wanted to show off a little, but she quickly said, "You're changing the topic again. We're talking about Robert Shea's shares now." Eric said, "I've already given you an answer. Absolutely not. This is not in line with my development plan for Firefly." Elizabeth went to Eric's sofa and squatted down. She pulled the man's arm and shook it. It was rare for her to use a coquettish tone and say, "Let's talk about it again." Eric quickly pulled his hand back and said with a face of fear, "Don't be like this. It's too scary." Isabel, who had finally mustered up the courage to act like a little woman, was dealt a huge blow. She almost wanted to pull Eric's arm over and bite it a few more times. "Okay, there's no room for discussion. But you can rest assured that Firefly will definitely maintain a good relationship with Fox." Elizabeth pouted unhappily. "Why does it sound like an excuse to deal with people?" Eric reached out and pinched the girl's chin. "Of course not. You're my woman. Of course I'll side with you. Fox's business is my business." Elizabeth pushed Eric's evil claws away. "A bastard who was just drawing a woman just now actually said that. Do you think I will believe your nonsense?" Although she said that, Elizabeth's face couldn't help but blush. If she knew Eric's true thoughts, she would have picked up the coffee pot on the round table beside her and poured it on Eric's head. Whether it was in his memory or the information he could see now, Murdoch's 2 sons were very good-for-nothing guys. They were the standard playboys. But Murdoch was obviously the kind of person who valued sons over daughters. Although Elizabeth was the strongest among his children, in his memory, Murdoch insisted on handing over News Corporation to his second son. Since Eric came to this world and accidentally had a connection with Elizabeth, he certainly couldn't let this happen again. Murdoch was now 60 years old. In less than 10 years, he would have to consider the problem of a successor. Eric's plan was of course to fully support Elizabeth to take control of News Corporation. "What's mine is mine. What's mine is mine. What's mine is mine." If it wasn't for this ultimate goal, why would he intervene in a small company like TG? In order to let The Silence of the Lambs win an Oscar, he was busy intercepting Dances with Wolves. These were all to increase Elizabeth's influence in the Murdoch family. Thinking of this, Eric couldn't help but look at the girl who was still squatting next to him. "You have to work hard. Don't let me down." The girl's eyes met his and slightly avoided his gaze. She reached out and gently hammered Eric's shoulder. "What are you up to now?" Speaking of which, you still owe me something, right? Why don't you pay up now? I'm in a good mood now, I can give you a 20% discount. Elizabeth subconsciously wanted to cover her back. Her arm suddenly moved because of this, but she quickly stopped and glared fiercely at Eric. Don't even think about it. Eric was only joking. Looking at the wary girl, he found a more proper topic and asked, "How's the PR for The Silence of the Lambs going? I previously suggested that you ask Mira, Mike, and Wayne Stan to help with PR. You didn't forget, right?" For some reason, Elizabeth felt that leaning next to Eric was a good position. It was a little warm. She pulled out a pillow from Eric's back and placed it under her knees. She laid on the sofa armrest on Eric's left and said, "I gave them $1 million in lobbying funds. I've been doing it myself. Dad transferred a manager from Fox's publicity department who's good at Oscar PR to help me. These days, I've been attending lobbying parties with Judy and Jonathan almost every day. One more thing, regarding Best Picture, don't submit Drew's name. Cross out Julia's name too." Elizabeth nodded and said, "Of course I know. If we submit both of them, the old Oscar judges will definitely not vote for us even if they think that The Silence of the Lambs is qualified to win. Also, I've decided to submit Jonathan Demme to Best Picture with me. This way, the chances of winning will be higher. It's a smart choice. Doing so will give the Oscar committee a way out. If you're a woman, the chances of winning will be greatly reduced. Discrimination against women is already a deep-rooted thing. It won't change even after 100 years. The Oscars are just like that. You give them face and they give you an award. Everyone wins and everyone is happy." Elizabeth pulled one of Eric's arms over and placed it under her chin. She looked up at Eric and said, "What about you? When do you plan to win an Oscar for Best Director?" Eric shrugged and said confidently, "With my current fame in Hollywood, it doesn't matter if I win an Oscar or not." "You're so arrogant. Look at your movies. They're all commercial films. There's no chance of winning an Oscar. You're the kind of fox that can't eat grapes." Thinking about his plans for special effects movies in the next few years, the chances of winning an Oscar became even slimmer. However, if Eric had to choose, he would definitely not give up his original plan to make an Oscar film. Chapter 394. Due to the restrictions of the preemptive right, although the shares in Robert Shea's hands were coveted by various parties, no company had resorted to malicious bidding to snatch them. After all, the shares were only 25%, and Eric had absolute control of Firefly. Whether it was the 7 major film companies or the 3 major television stations, the purpose of obtaining the shares was to cooperate with Eric. If they resorted to malicious bidding, it would undoubtedly offend Eric. Even if Eric could not offer a price that matched the malicious bidder and had to give up the preemptive right, the company that obtained the shares would be strongly resisted by Eric. In that case, it would be difficult to achieve the purpose of acquiring the shares. Therefore, the parties that had designs on the shares in Robert Shea's hands were more in contact with Eric. Only when Eric relented would they try to acquire the shares. Of course, from the beginning to the end, Eric had no intention of relenting. Elizabeth, who had suddenly visited the Sharp Corner Manor, dawdled with Eric for a while, but she did not get the man to relent. Since Connolly was present, the woman did not want to be a third wheel. After chatting for a while, she got up and left. Eric sent Elizabeth out of the villa. As they walked on the corridor of the manor, Elizabeth looked at the lush shrubs around her with her hands behind her back. Suddenly, she thought of something and said, "Everyone is fighting over the script of Throat Cutter Island that Robert took from you. Fox also wants to compete for it. You won't object to this, right?" Faced with this question, Eric hesitated for a moment and suddenly stopped. Elizabeth, who felt a little strange, also stopped. "Don't be so stingy. Anyway, this matter." Eric looked around and met the woman's eyes. He briefly said 2 words, "Don't fight." Elizabeth opened her mouth slightly and looked at Eric. Although she was a little unruly and arrogant, she was also a smart woman. She quickly realized something from Eric's expression. You did it on purpose? Eric nodded slightly and continued to walk toward the tarmac. Keep it to yourself. Don't tell anyone. If you ruin my business, I won't forgive you. Elizabeth glared at Eric. Why did he have to put the blame on her? However, she did not argue with Eric this time. She knew the severity of the matter. She nodded to show that she understood. Then she asked curiously, "Then what's with the script?" Eric said indifferently, "Don't ask about this." Elizabeth snorted in dissatisfaction. As the two entered the tarmac, the woman said to Eric, "I'm leaving. You can continue to draw your naked woman. Why did you make such a good thing sound so despicable? Practicing sketching is a very calming thing. Look at you, you are too impetuous. You should give it a try." Elizabeth said with a look of disbelief, "You can still remain calm when facing such a beautiful girl? That's the truth. There's obviously a pleasing model. I can't go and draw a plaster statue, right? You have too many fallacies." "I'm not going to argue with you," Elizabeth said. She saw the pilot waving at her to get on the plane. The woman came over and stood on her tiptoes to peck Eric's face. "Goodbye, I'm going back. Let's go. Say hello to Mr. Murdoch for me." Eric did not personally participate in the negotiations to buy back the shares in Robert Shea's hands. Not only would his presence not bring much benefit to the negotiations, but it was also likely to arouse Robert's resentment and hinder the negotiations. Jeffrey was mainly responsible for the negotiations on Firefly's side. At the same time, Eric invited his personal lawyer, Edward Lewis, and his team to cooperate. Eric planned to set up an exclusive legal department for Firefly after the new year and sent an invitation to Edward Lewis, who had been working happily with him. Just like when Carolyn Elliott joined Firefly's finance department, Edward Lewis agreed without much consideration. As Eric expected, Robert Shea did not have much cash in his hands, and he was unwilling to give up all the investment rights of Cutthroat Island. His desire for funds promoted the negotiation process to a certain extent. After 3 weeks of intense negotiations, on December 24th, the day before Christmas, the two sides finally reached an agreement. Firefly would buy back 25% of Robert Shea's shares at a price of $390 million. At the same time, Firefly would also pay Robert Shea's shareholder dividends and CEO salary for a year, totaling $60 million. At the cost of $450 million, Eric finally got rid of Robert Shea completely. The deal was settled, and it also aroused a great response in Hollywood. The reason why Columbia and Universal Pictures could be sold at a high price of $5 or $6 billion was mainly because the other party was a listed company, and the Japanese paid a high premium to facilitate the deal. Take Columbia Pictures for example. Before Sony announced the acquisition, Columbia's market value was only about $2 billion. And now, Firefly had not yet gone public. Through this transaction, the valuation of Firefly had exceeded the height of $1.5 billion. So, if Firefly maintained its current performance, after going public, it was likely to surpass any giant in Hollywood except for the Times Group that had merged with it. The day the two sides reached the deal was also the third day after the release of Flashpoint, produced by Eric and directed by Kathryn Bigelow. The box office of Flashpoint was released on the first weekend. It received more than $16 million in the first 3 days of its release in more than 1,800 theaters. For Kathryn Bigelow, an average of nearly $9,000 in the first 3 days was definitely a very good result. In Hollywood, if the average box office reached $10,000 in the first week, it meant that the director had entered the ranks of the top directors. After 4 days of release, Flashpoint would definitely exceed $10,000 in the first week. However, compared to Eric's previous films, this result was definitely a failure. Not to mention the films he directed, even Shock Island, which was also produced by Eric, had a box office of more than $20 million in the first weekend. Therefore, many media outlets blamed the failure of Flashpoint on Eric's impulse to drive out Robert Shea. After the box office of Flashpoint was released, Robert Shea once again publicly mocked Eric and threatened that this was only the beginning of Eric's failure. you're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.